Hey guys, before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Sit or lay down, dim the lights, and then let's begin. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. You open your eyes to the faint light creeping through the paper-thin shoji screens. Welcome to Kyoto, the bustling heart of 18th century Japan, where the air is filled with the scent of cherry blossoms and the sound of your day starting way too early. If you're thinking of hitting the snooze button, well, you can forget it. In the world of a geisha, the day begins before the sun even thinks about rising. Today, you're a geisha, or more accurately, you were once a maiko, an apprentice, and that's where the real sweat and glamour mix. Becoming a geisha isn't as simple as applying lipstick and perfecting your fan dance. Oh no, it's a full-blown cultural boot camp, starting when you're barely old enough to outgrow dolls. Let's say you began your training at around age 15, though some start even younger. Back then, you were a maiko, a title that made you sound like a tiny dancer, but really meant you were in for years of intense training. Now, being a maiko means you're an apprentice, and your education is no joke. Imagine spending 5 years mastering everything from classical music to intricate tea ceremonies. We're talking about lessons in shamisen, an instrument that's as complex to play as it is to spell dancing, singing, and the art of witty conversation. You had to turn yourself into a walking encyclopedia of charm. And here's a kicker. You weren't getting paid. In fact, you were probably racking up some serious debts. Those kimonos weren't going to pay for themselves. A single high-quality kimono could cost more than a small house. Yes, you heard it right. Your wardrobe could bankrupt a daimyo, and you hadn't even graduated yet. Let's talk numbers here, because who doesn't love a good sticker shock? The cost of becoming a geisha wasn't just about the clothes, though those could set you back hundreds of ryo, the currency of the time. You also had to pay for your lessons, your living expenses, and let's not forget the ornate hairstyles that could take hours to perfect. These weren't just any updos, mind you. You were essentially wearing a sculpture on your head. And maintaining all this? It was a full-time job before your actual full-time job. Ah, but the allure. The life of a geisha had all the appeal of being a social media influencer today, without the filters. You were the epitome of grace and mystery, the ultimate hostess in a world where men with power and money came to unwind. But the reality was a little more strenuous than sipping sake and exchanging pleasantries. You were the unsung multitasker of your time, balancing social graces with an exhausting schedule that would make a marathon runner sweat. As you get up and start your day, the first order of business is to get that face paint on point. You're not just smearing on any old makeup. This is an art form. White rice powder to give you that iconic pale complexion, red and black accents to emphasize your features, and let's not forget those perfectly drawn eyebrows. This was less about vanity and more about transformation. An act of becoming someone else entirely, someone who embodies tradition and elegance. But wait, there's more. After the makeup comes the kimono, a garment so intricate that dressing in one could be considered an Olympic sport. You've got layers upon layers of silk, meticulously tied and tucked. You don't just throw on a kimono, you become a masterpiece of textile engineering. Every fold, every color, every pattern is a statement, a piece of the larger puzzle that makes you, well, you. Once you're fully dressed and ready to face the day, you're not heading to a cozy office cubicle. Nope, you're stepping out into the vibrant streets of Kyoto, a city teeming with merchants, samurai, and the occasional ronin looking for work or trouble. This isn't just any city, it's the cultural epicenter of Japan, where the old and new collide in a whirlwind of tradition and commerce. The streets are alive with the clatter of wooden sandals on cobblestones, the air thick with the smell of incense and street food. Your first stop? The tea house, where you'll spend hours perfecting your craft. Forget the Starbucks training manual. This is the real deal. The tea ceremony is a dance in itself, a ritual that's as much about the process as it is about the product. Every movement is deliberate, every gesture a part of a centuries-old tradition. You're not just serving tea, you're creating an experience, a moment of peace in a chaotic world. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of a geisha isn't all tea and roses. While the romanticized version paints you as an enigmatic figure moving gracefully through the night, the truth involves a lot more hustle. You're constantly learning, adapting, and proving yourself in a world where competition is fierce and standards are impossibly high. Every night is a performance, and every client is a critic. Still, there's a certain magic to it all. Despite the hardships, being a geisha is about more than just surviving. It's about thriving in a world that sees you as both an artist and a mystery. You're part of a legacy, a tradition that's as fascinating as it is demanding. And as the day unfolds, you find yourself not just playing a role, but living a history that's as rich and complex as the kimono you wear. So, there you are, in the heart of Kyoto, a geisha in all her glory. The sun may be just rising, but your day is well underway, filled with rituals, responsibilities, and the ever-present allure of a world that's as beautiful as it is relentless. Welcome to the life of a geisha, where history isn't just something you learn, it's something you live. As the sun rises higher over Kyoto, it's time to dive headfirst into the mid-morning grind, where the real magic or madness begins. Forget about lounging around. You're off to a whirlwind of lessons that'll make your head spin faster than a samurai sword. First on the agenda, mastering the traditional arts that define a geisha's very existence. Think of it as Hogwarts, but with more tea and fewer invisibility cloaks. Let's kick things off with the tea ceremony, a ritual that makes brewing a cup of Earl Grey look like child's play. The tea ceremony is no ordinary sip-and-chat affair. It's a centuries-old ballet where every flick of the wrist and tilt of the cup is choreographed to perfection. The history here is rich, originating from Zen Buddhist practices in the 9th century. It was elevated to an art form by the 15th century. Fast forward to your time, the 18th century, and you'd better believe it's a full-blown cultural spectacle. We're talking powdered green tea, known as matcha, whisked to frothy perfection in bowls that could double as modern art pieces. Every movement, from the way you pour the water to how you fold your cloth, is a nod to the past, a dance with history itself. Next up, it's time to channel your inner Fred Astaire, minus the tap shoes. Dance lessons are a staple for any geisha worth her salt, and the stakes are high. Forget the electric slide, we're talking about traditional Japanese dances like the kyo-mai, a sophisticated style that emerged during the Edo period. This isn't your run-of-the-mill recital. These dances were designed to enchant and captivate, and they held layers of meaning, often reflecting the seasons or telling ancient stories. Your moves needed to be as precise as a surgeon's scalpel because, in the world of geisha, one misstep could mean the difference between applause and awkward silence. Now, let's talk music. Enter the shamisen, a 3-stringed instrument with a sound that can evoke everything from the whisper of cherry blossoms to the roar of a stormy sea. It's the rock star of traditional Japanese music, and learning to play it is no small feat. The shamisen sound is iconic, and in the hands of a skilled player, it can convey a myriad of emotions. The geisha's repertoire wasn't just about making pretty noises, it was about conveying stories and emotions, acting as a bridge between the performer and the audience. But let's not get too starry-eyed just yet. Behind the scenes, life in the okiya, the geisha house, is less Memoirs of a Geisha and more Survivor, Kyoto edition. The hierarchy in the okiya is as rigid as a bonsai tree. At the top sits the okasan, or mother of the house, the matriarch who runs the show with the precision of a Swiss watch. Her word is law, and crossing her is about as wise as challenging a sumo wrestler to a dance-off. Below her are the senior geisha, the stars of the show who've earned their stripes. And then there are the maiko and the house attendants, the ones doing the grunt work while dreaming of their future stardom. Let's sprinkle in some economic reality, shall we? Becoming a geisha isn't just about artistry, it's a financial tightrope walk. The okiya operates like a business, and each geisha is an investment. The training, the kimonos, the makeup. It's all an expensive affair, and the pressure to succeed is as intense as a Kyoto summer. It's a high-stakes game where the cards are often stacked against you. The cost of maintaining this lifestyle was staggering. We're talking about expenses that could rival the GDP of a small village. The top-tier geisha could command fees upwards of 1 ryo per engagement. But remember, much of that went back to the okiya to cover debts and expenses. And while we're at it, let's bust a myth wider than a sumo wrestler's waistband. Geishas were not mere entertainers or glorified party starters. They were cultural ambassadors, the living embodiment of Japanese art and tradition. Their roles were multifaceted. Part performer, part conversationalist, part diplomat. They were skilled in navigating the complex social landscapes of their time, providing a blend of entertainment, education, and cultural insight all rolled into one. The allure of a geisha was in her ability to weave a tapestry of elegance, wit, and sophistication, turning every encounter into a masterclass of cultural grace. Sure, the romanticized image of the geisha as an ethereal figure moving gracefully through the night has its appeal, but let's not sugarcoat it. The reality was a grind, a relentless pursuit of perfection in a world that demanded nothing less. Every day was a test, every performance a chance to prove your worth in a society where reputation was everything. So, as the morning lessons draw to a close and the afternoon sun casts long shadows on the cobblestones, you're left with a complex portrait of what it truly means to be a geisha. It's a life of artistry and austerity, of grace under pressure, and of cultural significance woven into every gesture and song. And as you take a moment to catch your breath, you realize that the day is far from over. The night awaits, with its own set of challenges and charms, and the story of the geisha continues to unfold, as rich and intricate as the kimono you wear. As the afternoon light slips through the lattice windows, casting intricate shadows on the tatami mats, you prepare to step into a world where your influence is as subtle and powerful as a samurai's blade, without the bloodshed, ideally. You're not just an entertainer, you're a social alchemist, turning the mundane into the mesmerizing. Your guests tonight? A mix of wealthy merchants and political figures, each as eager for your company as they are for the sake. The tea house is your stage, and you, the star performer, know every line by heart. But before the curtain rises, let's address the myth that geishas were mere decorative accessories in a male-dominated society. Wrong. In fact, you were the unsung power players of your time. You had the ear of the elite, and in an era where alliances could be as fleeting as cherry blossoms, your influence was as intoxicating as plum wine. Now, let's dive into the tea ceremony, an art form where you've turned brewing a beverage into a theatrical performance. This isn't your average tea party with mismatched mugs and limp biscuits. This is a ritual, honed over centuries, with roots as deep as the bamboo forests of Kyoto. Every flick of the wrist, every delicate pour, is a carefully orchestrated dance. You wield the tea whisk like a maestro conducts an orchestra, transforming powdered matcha into a frothy emerald elixir. And here's the kicker. This is more than just serving tea. It's a diplomatic ballet, where each gesture speaks volumes. In a single sitting, you could build alliances, broker peace, or offer sage advice, all without uttering a word. The tea ceremony was your canvas, and you painted with the colors of subtlety and finesse. It's a testament to the geisha's role as a cultural diplomat, one who could influence the movers and shakers of the Edo period from behind a veil of elegance. But let's not sugarcoat the setting. It's a man's world, and you're just living in it, right? Not quite. While it might seem like the scales are tipped in favor of your male counterparts, you've mastered the art of leverage. The secret lies in your ability to navigate social dynamics with the precision of a tightrope walker. In a society where men held the official power, you wielded the unofficial kind. You were the confidant and the muse, the one who could sway opinions and soften hearts. Picture this. A merchant, pocket-heavy with Rio, sits before you, eager for your attention. He may have the wealth, but you've got the wit. Through deft conversation and impeccable charm, you could coax a secret or a strategic move out of him faster than a ninja in the night. These interactions weren't just about entertainment. They were a dance of intellect and influence. Your stories, your songs, even your laughter were tools of persuasion, bending the ears of men who controlled the flow of commerce and policy. Let's talk economics for a second. A single evening with a high-ranking geisha could cost a small fortune, the equivalent of several months' wages for a common laborer. The fee wasn't just for the performance, it was for the privilege of entering a world where art and intellect converged. And while the okiya took a significant cut, you knew the value of your presence. It was a delicate balance of supply and demand, with you as the linchpin holding it all together. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, or rather, the myth that geishas were powerless puppets. The truth is, you were anything but. You had a unique kind of autonomy, one that allowed you to maneuver through the societal labyrinth with remarkable agility. You negotiated your terms, selected your patrons, and maintained a level of independence that was rare for women of the time. It was a subtle rebellion wrapped in silk and song, a testament to the geisha's resilience in a patriarchal world. The afternoon wanes, and as you prepare for the evening's engagements, you reflect on the duality of your existence. You're both artist and advocate, entertainer and enigma. Your world is one of contrasts, where tradition meets innovation, and where every moment is an opportunity to redefine your role. You're part of a legacy that transcends mere performance, a living testament to the power of culture and charisma. So, as the sun dips below the horizon and the lanterns flicker to life, you're ready to step into the night, a geisha in all her glory. The stage is set, the audience awaits, and the story of your life continues to unfold, as intricate and compelling as the patterns on your kimono. Welcome to the dance of diplomacy and art, where every gesture is a statement and every word a whisper of history. As the lanterns flicker to life, casting their warm glow over the streets of Kyoto, you feel the evening's energy shift. A subtle but unmistakable cue that it's time to step into the spotlight. Tonight, the banquet awaits, the main event where your skills as a geisha will transform a simple gathering into an unforgettable spectacle. But let's not get carried away by the allure just yet. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes than meets the eye. Picture the banquet as the Oscars of the Edo period. Well, maybe with less paparazzi and more tea. These events were a blend of high-stakes diplomacy and cultural showcase, where the who's who of society came to see and be seen. The hosts spared no expense. Think lavish feasts featuring delicacies like fugu, that's pufferfish, and yes, it's as risky as it sounds, grilled eel, and the finest steak that money could buy. These banquets weren't just expensive. They were a financial tightrope walk, with the cost of hosting often rivaling the construction of a small castle. And you? You're the evening's headliner, the superstar whose presence justifies every ryo spent. Your entrance is a calculated blend of grace and gravitas, each step a statement of your mastery. Forget about a casual stroll, this is a performance from the moment you set foot in the room. The air is thick with anticipation, a blend of excitement and reverence as the guests await the enchantment only a geisha can provide. Now, let's talk numbers, because, in the world of geisha, the economics are as intricate as the patterns on your kimono. A single night's engagement could set a patron back anywhere from 1 to 3 ryo, depending on your status and the exclusivity of the event. Remember, this was at a time when a common labourer might earn just a single ryo in an entire year. So yes, this was big business, and you were the main attraction. But don't let the glamour fool you. While the money changed hands, the reality was that much of it went to the okiya, covering debts and expenses that seemed as endless as a haiku about the ocean. The geisha herself received a fraction, a stark reminder that even in the world of art and elegance, financial independence was a distant dream for many. Yet, the evening wasn't just about economics or entertainment. Oh no, it was also about influence. As you perform, you're not merely an entertainer, you're a subtle commentator, weaving social critique into your art. Through song and dance, you paint a picture of societal foibles, delivering commentary with a finesse that could rival a diplomat's speech. This was your power, the ability to shape the narrative, to influence thought under the guise of entertainment. And let's not gloss over the myths of geisha-patron relationships. There's a romantic notion that a geisha was the concubine to every man with enough ryo to spare. In reality, these relationships were often much more complex, involving a delicate balance of power and respect. Yes, some patrons became dana, or sponsors, providing financial support in exchange for a deeper connection. But the idea that geishas were mere playthings of the rich, pure fiction. The relationships were often more akin to patronage in the arts, where the geisha retained significant autonomy and influence. Speaking of influence, your role as a geisha was as much about emotional intelligence as it was about artistic skill. You had to read the room, gauge the mood, and adapt your performance accordingly. Whether it was a lively dance to lift spirits or a heartfelt song to provoke reflection, your art was your voice, and you wielded it with the precision of a calligrapher's brush. Of course, the evening wasn't just about you. The banquets were a social microcosm, a melting pot of personalities and agendas. Merchants rubbed shoulders with samurai, and political alliances were forged over cups of sake. You were not just a bystander in this dance, you were a key player. able to nudge conversations and subtly sway decisions with your well-timed wit and charm. Let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung logistics of these events. Behind the scenes, the planning was as intricate as a no performance. Every detail, from the seating arrangements to the sequence of courses, was orchestrated to perfection. This was a world where chaos was anathema, and order reigned supreme, unless, of course, the sake flowed too freely, which it often did. And as the night wore on, you'd witness the full spectrum of human emotion. Laughter, camaraderie, the occasional drunken confession, each interaction a glimpse into the lives of those who held the strings of power. Through it all, you remained the constant, the eye of the storm, a symbol of tradition and continuity in a world that seemed to change with the seasons. As the final notes of the shamisen fade and the guests begin to depart, you're left with a sense of accomplishment tempered by the understanding that tomorrow brings new challenges. The life of a geisha is a never-ending cycle of performance and preparation, mastery and mystery. It's a world of contradictions where art and economy, tradition and innovation coexist in a delicate dance. So, as the lanterns flicker their last and the night settles into silence, you retreat into the shadows, ever the enigma, ever the artist. The story of your life is far from over, with new chapters to be written and new stages to grace. Welcome to the world of the geisha, a world where history is lived, not just learned, and where every moment is a testament to the power of grace under pressure. As the night concludes and the echoes of your shamisen performance fade into the Kyoto night, let's pivot to a different stage, history's relentless march forward. Just like those lanterns that gradually dim, the geisha tradition saw its own twilight. The post-World War II era brought seismic shifts, not just in geopolitics, but in the very fabric of Japanese society. The occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur and his crew of reform-happy allies, was about as subtle as a sumo wrestler on a tightrope. Japan was being rebuilt, and amid this reconstruction, traditional roles, including that of the geisha, were up for renegotiation. The late 1940s and 50s were a time of rapid change, and the geisha found themselves caught in the crosshairs of modernization. The allure of Western culture was as irresistible as a sakura blossom in spring, and as Japan rebuilt its economy, the geisha tradition faced challenges it had never encountered before. The number of practicing geisha dwindled like sake at a banquet, from tens of thousands in the early 20th century to a mere shadow of its former self by the late 1950s. The allure of the modern workforce, with its promise of economic independence and different social structures, lured many young women away from the traditional paths. The geisha houses, once bustling centers of art and influence, began to feel the pinch. Economic factors played a significant role here. Why spend years mastering the art of the shamisen when a corporate job could offer more immediate financial stability? The costs of maintaining the geisha lifestyle, from the kimonos to the lessons, became unsustainable in a rapidly industrializing society. But let's not declare the geisha dead and buried just yet. Like any great performer, the tradition adapted, albeit at a reduced scale. In the latter half of the 20th century, efforts to preserve this unique cultural heritage gained momentum. Enter the cultural preservationists, Japan's equivalent of historical paramedics, ready to resuscitate and restore. Government initiatives and private endeavors aimed to keep the tradition alive, albeit in a modern context. The geisha would not disappear into the annals of history without a fight. One of the most significant efforts came in the form of the geisha revival in the 1970s and 80s. Cultural festivals and tourism initiatives highlighted the geisha as living symbols of Japan's rich history. These efforts were not just about nostalgia, they were economically savvy. The tourism industry recognized that the mystique of the geisha could attract foreign visitors eager to experience a piece of authentic Japan. Talk about turning a cultural relic into a commercial asset. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the elephant in the tatami room, the romanticized image of the geisha as otherworldly beings trapped in a bygone era. Sure, the allure of the geisha is undeniable, they're the epitome of grace and mystery. But the reality? It's a bit more complex. Geishas were, and remain, skilled artisans and cultural ambassadors. They're not some exotic fantasy. They're human beings navigating a world that often pigeonholes them into stereotypes. Today, there are approximately 1,000 practicing geisha in Japan, with Kyoto's Gion district remaining a stronghold. They continue to serve as cultural custodians, preserving traditional arts while adapting to contemporary norms. The geisha of today are as likely to be seen performing at a cultural festival as they are entertaining at a private banquet. They're a testament to resilience, proving that tradition can coexist with modernity. So, what does this all mean for the legacy of the geisha? It's a narrative of continuity and change, of adaptation amidst adversity. The geisha tradition challenges us to look beyond the romantic veneer and recognize the complex interplay of art, economics, and societal evolution. It's a reminder that culture is not a static artifact, but a living, breathing entity capable of transformation while retaining its core essence. In the end, the story of the geisha is more than a tale of artistry and allure. It's a reflection of the broader societal shifts that have shaped Japan over the centuries. As you step back from the stage, leaving behind the world of kimonos and shamisen, take with you the understanding that the geisha's legacy is one of endurance and adaptation. It's a story of how history and culture can evolve without losing their soul. And so, as you weave through the quiet streets of Kyoto, the moon casting its silver glow on the cobblestones, remember that the geisha tradition, like the city itself, is a tapestry woven from threads of the past and present. It's a dance of history and hope, a testament to the enduring power of culture to inspire and transform. Welcome to the legacy of the geisha, where history is alive, and the dance continues, ever graceful, ever resilient. Draco, the infamous lawmaker of ancient Athens, was the kind of guy who would make even the strictest school principal look like a cuddly teddy bear. Picture a legal system where a stolen cabbage could land you in a world of hurt. Literally. Yes, folks. We're diving into the Draconian Code, a set of laws so severe that they make today's legal fines seem like a soft pat on the back. The year is 621 BCE, and Athens is a bustling city-state with a penchant for drama, both on and off the amphitheatre stage. Amidst political chaos and social unrest, a man named Draco steps up to the plate. His mission? Establish a legal code that would bring order to the Athenian chaos. But what transpired was less order and more order in the court of extreme measures. Draco's laws were written in blood, or so the legend goes, and while that might be a bit of an exaggeration, it's no lie that his legal framework was harsh enough to leave a lasting mark on history. In fact, the term draconian still echoes today, describing any measure that feels more punitive than protective. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What made these laws so notorious? First off, almost every crime, from the mundane to the monstrous, carried the death penalty. Yes, you heard right. Whether you were caught stealing a loaf of bread or committing a murder, the consequences were the same. Good old capital punishment. Talk about a one-size-fits-all approach. This wasn't exactly the kind of justice system you'd write home about, unless your letter was a plea for mercy. So why the overkill, you might ask? Well, Draco's laws were less about fairness and more about reinforcing the power of Athens' elite. With the rich getting richer and the poor getting the short end of the stick, the laws served as a convenient tool for the upper echelons of society to maintain their comfy status quo. And let's not forget, these laws were inscribed on wooden tablets and displayed in public, making sure everyone knew just how easily they could fall afoul of the state. Draco himself is a bit of an enigma. Despite being a pivotal figure in legal history, there's not a whole lot we know about him personally. What we do know is that he had the backing of Athens' aristocracy, which probably explains why his laws were more about protecting property and privilege than promoting justice and equality. In a city where the rich were few and the poor were legion, Draco's laws sent a clear message: cross the line and you're toast. Now, you might wonder why such a draconian, pun absolutely intended system even came into being. To understand that, we need to delve into the societal dynamics of Athens at the time. This was a period marked by significant tension between the wealthy landowners and the common citizens. The haves had all the power and resources, while the have-nots were often left scrambling for scraps. By implementing such harsh laws, the ruling class could keep a tight grip on their power, ensuring that the social order remained firmly in their favor. But let's hit pause on this dark narrative for a moment. Despite the brutality of Draco's laws, there's a certain grim fascination with his approach to law and order. After all, here was a man who didn't believe in half measures. His code might have been brutal, but it was also remarkably straightforward. No need to decipher the fine print when the punishment for almost everything was death. Of course, in the grand tapestry of history, such a rigid system couldn't last forever. The seeds of discontent were already being sown, and it wouldn't be long before Athens would see another reformer step onto the scene, someone with a more balanced approach to governance. But that's a story for another time. As we wrap up our first act in the saga of Athenian law, it's worth pondering the legacy of Draco and his code. While his laws were eventually repealed and replaced, the term draconian survived, a linguistic nod to a time when justice wore a particularly severe face. In the end, Draco may not have won any popularity contests, but he certainly left an indelible mark on history, a reminder that the scales of justice can sometimes tip towards the absurd. So there you have it, a peek into the foundations of Athenian law, where justice was less about fairness and more about keeping the elites snug in their ivory towers. Draco may have been long gone, but his name lives on in infamy, a testament to the enduring power of a harsh legal code. And with that, we close the chapter on Draco and his bloody laws, stepping forward into the next phase of Athenian legal history. Stay tuned, because the drama of ancient Athens is far from over. And so the curtain closes on Draco's dramatic legal theatre, where the script was short, the stakes were high, and the actors, well, they didn't get much applause. But fear not, history buffs, Athens was not destined to remain in this grim legal quagmire forever. Enter Solon, the statesman with a penchant for problem-solving and a knack for political rebranding that would make any modern spin doctor proud. We're now in 594 BCE, and Athens is still a city riddled with social tension, like a pressure cooker ready to blow. The economic disparity was so vast that it made today's wealth gap look like a mere blip on the radar. The rich were living it up in luxury, while the poor were often so indebted that they'd end up as slaves if they couldn't pay their dues. Picture the horror of losing your freedom over a bad harvest or a failed business venture. Talk about a bad day at the office. Solon was the man chosen to navigate these choppy waters. He was a mediator, a poet, and a man who understood that sometimes you've got to shake things up to calm things down. His reforms were aptly called the seisachthia, or shaking off of burdens, which sounds like a yoga pose but was actually a radical overhaul of Athenian debt laws. Imagine the ancient equivalent of wiping out student loans, only instead of diplomas, people's freedom and dignity were on the line. Solon's big move was to cancel all existing debts and ban debt slavery. That's right, he hit the economic reset button, freeing countless Athenians from the shackles of servitude. It was the kind of bold stroke that would have made any populist politician green with envy. But let's not get carried away with romantic visions of altruism. Solon's reforms were as much about ensuring social stability as they were about justice. The economic context of Solon's time was a heady mix of agricultural dependency and burgeoning trade. Athens was trying to transition from a primarily agrarian society to one that could hold its own in the Mediterranean trade game. This meant that land and the wealth associated with it was everything. The rich landowners held all the cards, and the common folk were often left with a losing hand. By abolishing debt slavery and forgiving debts, Solon was attempting to level the playing field, at least a little. He also introduced new measures to encourage economic participation, like reforming the weights and measures to standardize trade and making it easier for non-landowners to engage in commerce. It was a bit like deregulating the stock market, but for olive oil and pottery. But before we start painting Solon as the Athenian Robin Hood, let's pump the brakes. His reforms, while progressive, didn't exactly topple the power structures of the day. The aristocracy still held significant sway, and the social hierarchy remained largely intact. Solon's genius was in crafting reforms that offered just enough change to quell the unrest, without radically altering the status quo. It was a delicate balancing act, and for the most part it worked. One of Solon's less glamorous, but equally important, reforms was the creation of a new class structure based on wealth rather than birth. This was revolutionary in a world where noble lineage was often the golden ticket to power. By basing political eligibility on wealth, Solon opened the door for the nouveau riche to enter the political arena. It wasn't exactly a democracy yet, but it was a step in the right direction, offering a glimmer of hope for upward mobility. Solon also reformed the judicial system, introducing the concept of trial by jury. This was a radical departure from the previous methods, where disputes were often settled by fists or fortune. Imagine a courtroom drama where ordinary citizens could decide the fate of their peers, a precursor to the modern jury system. It was a baby step towards a more equitable legal process, and it laid the groundwork for future democratic developments. For all his efforts, Solon was neither universally loved nor reviled. He was more of a reluctant hero, aware of the limitations of his reforms but committed to making the best of a tricky situation. When his work was done, he did what any sensible reformer would do. He left town for 10 years, giving his policies time to take root without his interference. It was the ancient equivalent of dropping the mic and walking off stage. In the end, Solon's legacy was a mixed bag, as most legacies tend to be. He didn't solve all of Athens' problems, but he did manage to buy the city some much-needed time and stability. His reforms were a compromise, a middle path between the extremes of Draco's harshness and the chaos of complete anarchy. And while the path to democracy was still a long way off, Solon's efforts were an important milestone on that journey. As we leave Solon to the annals of history, it's worth reflecting on the delicate dance of politics and power. Solon understood that meaningful change often requires compromise, and that sometimes progress is about making the best of imperfect solutions. His reforms may not have been perfect, but they were a crucial step in Athens' evolution from a city ruled by the iron fist of the elite to one that dared to dream of democracy. So, with a nod to Solon's savvy statecraft, we continue our exploration of ancient Athens, where the seeds of democracy were being sown amidst the rocky soil of social and economic upheaval. Stay with us, because the story is far from over, and there's plenty more drama to come in this epic saga of law, order, and the enduring quest for justice. And so, as we wrap our minds around Solon's savvy statecraft, let's step into the next chapter of Athenian evolution, where democracy was less a birthright and more like a VIP club with a bouncer who checked your toga for wealth and status. Forget about one man, one vote. In Athens, it was more like one wealthy man, one vote maybe. Welcome to the world of the Athenian assembly, or the ecclesias, if you want to impress your friends at dinner parties. This was the grand stage where decisions were made, laws were passed, and, occasionally, drama unfolded that could rival any Greek tragedy. Every citizen, theoretically, had the right to attend these meetings. But before you get too starry-eyed about this ancient beacon of democracy, hold your horses, or, more accurately, your chariots. In reality, participation was about as exclusive as a high-end country club. The assembly met on the Pnyx, a hill that offered both a scenic view of the Acropolis and a natural amphitheatre for heated debates. The catch? Only male citizens over the age of 18 were allowed to participate. Women, slaves, and foreigners, aka the majority of the population, were left out in the Athenian cold. And even among the eligible, the practicalities of life meant that showing up wasn't always feasible. It's hard to pop over to a political assembly when you've got a farm to run or debts to dodge. So, who did make it to these gatherings? Mostly the well-off, those who could afford the time away from their daily grind. Wealth, as always, had its privileges. But for those who did attend, the assembly was the place to be. Imagine thousands of citizens packed together, each with the power to raise their hand and shout their opinions. It was chaotic, loud, and, at times, surprisingly democratic, if you happened to be part of the lucky few. The assembly met around 40 times a year, which might sound like a lot of civic engagement, until you realize that these sessions were their version of Netflix. This was where the action happened, decisions were made, and, occasionally, the fate of Athens was decided by a bunch of guys basically yelling at each other. Think of it as ancient Greece's answer to reality TV, only with more togas and fewer commercial breaks. Now, while the assembly was the headline act, the real power often lay behind the curtain with the bull or the Council of 500. These folks were the ones who set the agenda, a bit like the producers of a reality show deciding which drama to air. The bull was responsible for day-to-day governance, ensuring that the city didn't implode between assembly meetings. What's truly fascinating, and a little bit amusing, is how the bull was selected. Forget elections, the Athenians had a unique solution to the problem of corruption and power-grabbing, the lottery. That's right, they literally drew names from a hat, or rather, a clay pot, to decide who would govern. It was like the ancient equivalent of jury duty, except with more political clout and less chance of falling asleep in the back row. This lottery system wasn't just a whimsical quirk, it was a clever way to keep any one faction from gaining too much control. After all, when power is up for grabs, humans tend to get a little greedy. The Athenians understood this all too well and decided that chance was a better arbiter than ambition. It was a democratic safeguard, a way to ensure that every citizen had an equal shot at shaping the city's future, even if that future included some questionable decisions. Of course, the lottery system wasn't perfect. It had its critics, and with good reason. After all, leaving governance to chance meant that sometimes the most qualified individuals were left out in favour of those who just happened to have a lucky draw. But in a society that valued equality among its citizens, at least among those who counted as citizens, it was seen as a necessary compromise. The bull and the assembly worked together in a sort of ancient checks and balances system, ensuring that no single group could run away with power. But don't start thinking of them as a model for modern governance just yet. For all its innovations, Athenian democracy was still very much a product of its time, a society built on the backs of the many for the benefit of the few. Yet despite its flaws, Athenian democracy was revolutionary in its openness to citizen participation, even if citizen was a term with more asterisks than a dubious health claim. It was a bold experiment, one that paved the way for future generations to refine, replicate, and reimagine what democracy could be. And so, as we stand on the Pnyx, overlooking the legacy of this ancient experiment in self-governance, we can't help but marvel at the audacity of it all. The birth of democracy in Athens wasn't a neat, tidy affair. It was messy, complicated, and full of contradictions. But maybe that's the true beauty of democracy. It's never finished, always a work in progress, much like the city of Athens itself. As we prepare to delve even deeper into the annals of Athenian history, let's keep in mind that this was just the beginning. The seeds of democracy were sown, but there was plenty of reading and pruning left to do. So stay tuned, because the story of Athens is far from over, and there's a whole lot more drama to unfold in this epic saga of human ambition, folly, and the enduring quest for a fairer society. As we continue our journey into the labyrinth of Athenian justice, let's trade our tickets to the Pnyx for a front-row seat at the Athenian courts, where citizens became both lawyers and actors, and the drama was as thick as the olive groves of Attica. If you thought the assembly was wild, wait until you hear about the courtroom antics that make modern legal dramas look like a game of checkers. First off, forget the idea of a cozy, wood-panelled courtroom with a judge in a robe. The Athenian courts were more like open-air theatres, without the popcorn but with plenty of tension. Picture this. A crowd of up to 500 citizens, all jury members, crammed together to decide your fate. Yes, you heard right, 500. That's more than enough to fill a small stadium or an awkward family reunion. Now, why such a massive jury? Well, the Athenians were nothing if not cautious about corruption. The logic was simple. With so many jurors, it was harder for anyone to buy them all off, unless they had the kind of wealth that could make Croesus blush. It was the ancient version of crowdsourcing justice, ensuring a verdict that was both democratic and, let's face it, a bit chaotic. In the Athenian legal system, everyone was their own attorney. There were no smooth-talking lawyers to rescue you from a verbal nosedive. If you wanted justice, you had to stand up and argue your case yourself. Imagine the pressure. No wonder Athenian citizens needed to be as good at storytelling as they were at arguing facts. Your ability to weave a compelling narrative could be the difference between freedom and a very unpleasant outcome. And here's where it gets truly theatrical. The Athenians used water clocks to time speeches. Yes, water clocks. Clepsydras, if you want to sound like you majored in ancient technology. These ingenious devices measured time by the flow of water from one vessel to another. When the water ran out, so did your time to plead your case. It was a literal race against the clock, adding a layer of tension that even the best courtroom dramas would envy. Speaking of drama, litigants often resorted to emotional appeals, complete with tears, gestures, and poignant tales of woe. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a performance, and the stakes were high. With no lawyers to guide them, defendants and plaintiffs alike had to rely on their wits and charisma. It was like a talent show where the prize was your future, and the audience was a jury of your peers, all armed with the power to decide your fate. Now, let's talk about the quirks of Athenian justice. For starters, there were no professional judges. Instead, a group of magistrates called archons oversaw proceedings, but their role was more administrative than judicial. They organized the trial, but the jury had the final say. It was democracy in action, or at least a version of it where the loudest voices often had the upper hand. Economic context played a significant role in these legal proceedings. In a society where wealth equaled influence, poorer citizens often faced an uphill battle in court. If you couldn't afford to take time off your day job to prepare a flashy speech, your chances were slim. And let's not forget, the wealthy could hire speechwriters, logographers, to craft their arguments, giving them a polished edge in the courtroom theatrics. But the Athenian legal system was not without its merits. It was remarkably accessible, at least for those who qualified as citizens. In theory, anyone could bring a case to court, and the sheer size of the jury meant that verdicts were, more often than not, a reflection of collective sentiment. It was an imperfect system, but it was revolutionary for its time, a precursor to the modern concept of trial by jury. Of course, the system had its critics. Some argued that the large juries were more susceptible to mob mentality than reasoned judgment. Others pointed out that the absence of professional legal representation put less articulate citizens at a disadvantage. But love it or hate it, the Athenian courts were a testament to the city's commitment to public participation, a chaotic, messy, yet oddly democratic affair. As we delve deeper into the annals of Athenian justice, it's clear that this was a city unafraid to experiment with governance. The legal system, like the political structure, was a bold attempt to balance power, fairness, and the ever-present spectre of corruption. It was a dance between order and chaos, a testament to human ingenuity and, occasionally, folly. So, as we leave the courts of Athens, where justice was more performance art than legal science, let's ponder the legacy of this ancient experiment. The Athenian legal system was a mirror reflecting the city's values and contradictions, a place where citizens could both seek justice and lose it in the same breath. It was a world of drama, tension, and the enduring quest for fairness amidst the tumult of human ambition. And with that, we step away from the Athenian courts, our minds buzzing with the echoes of ancient orations and the splash of water clocks. But fear not, fellow history buffs, for the story of Athens is far from over. There's more to uncover, more drama to witness, and more lessons to learn as we continue our exploration of this remarkable city and its quest for justice. Stay tuned, because the saga of Athens is just getting started. As we wave goodbye to the courtroom theatrics of Athens, let's shift our gaze to the broader legacy of Athenian law and its democratic aspirations. The ancient city-state, for all its grandeur and philosophical musings, built a legal framework that was both groundbreaking and, let's be honest, a bit of a hot mess. But isn't that the beauty of history? It's a canvas splattered with both triumphs and disasters, each stroke telling a story of human ambition and folly. Now, the Athenian democracy is often hailed as the granddaddy of all democratic systems. But before we start handing out medals, let's take a closer look. The democracy in Athens was, to put it mildly, a members-only club with a very exclusive guest list. Out of a population of about 300,000, only 30,000 or so were considered citizens with voting rights. That's roughly 10% of the populace, a number that makes the concept of rule by the people seem more like rule by a privileged few. The assembly, that noisy gathering where decisions were hashed out, was indeed a marvel of participatory governance for its time. Yet the reality was a tad less utopian. The decisions made atop the Pnyx were often steered by the wealthier strata, those who could afford the luxury of civic engagement. While the working class was busy ensuring there was bread on the table, the affluent were busy moulding laws that, surprise, often served their interests. And let's not overlook the role of the bull, that council of 500 selected by lottery. Sure, it sounds delightfully democratic, a political game of chance where anyone could end up with a seat at the table. But the system was less about merit and more about maintaining an equilibrium that kept the powerful from gaining too much clout. The randomness was an ingenious way to keep the political waters from getting too murky, but it also meant that governance sometimes resembled a game of dice rather than a strategic chess match. Yet, despite these shortcomings, there's an undeniable allure to Athenian democracy. It was an audacious experiment in self-governance, a bold declaration that citizens could and should have a say in their collective destiny. The idea that ordinary people could wield power was revolutionary, even if the ordinary people in question were a select group of landowning males. The myth of Athenian democracy has a certain romance to it, like a sepia-toned photograph that glosses over the blemishes and highlights the ideals. It's easy to get swept up in the narrative of Athens as the cradle of democracy, a beacon of freedom that lit the way for future generations. But like any good myth, it's a mix of truth, exaggeration, and a healthy dose of wishful thinking. So, what lessons can modern societies glean from this ancient experiment? For starters, the Athenians understood the importance of public participation, even if their version was a bit skewed. The idea that governance should be a collective endeavour, rather than the purview of a select few, is a principle worth preserving. But let's not forget that true democracy requires inclusivity, a lesson Athens learned the hard way. Moreover, the Athenians knew that power unchecked is power abused. Their use of lotteries to fill political roles was a hedge against corruption, a reminder that the pursuit of power often needs a leash. In today's world, where political machinations can seem more scripted than reality TV, this Athenian check on ambition resonates deeply. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Athenian democracy is its acknowledgement of imperfection. The city-state's legal and political systems were far from flawless, yet they were constantly evolving. They were a testament to the idea that democracy is not a destination, but a journey, a continual process of refinement and adaptation. It's a reminder that even the most storied systems need regular maintenance to stay on course. And so, as we tie a bow on our exploration of Athenian law, let's do so with a nod to the past and an eye on the future. Athens, for all its warts and wrinkles, dared to dream of a society where power rested in the hands of the people. It was a bold experiment, one that laid the groundwork for centuries of political thought and debate. Yet, it was also a cautionary tale of exclusion and inequality, a reminder that true democracy requires both vision and vigilance. As we step away from the dusty streets and sunlit hills of ancient Athens, we can carry with us the lessons learned from a society that dared to chart a new course through the turbulent seas of governance. The journey to democracy is never complete, but with each step we get a little closer to realizing its promise. So, here's to Athens, the city that sparked a revolution in governance, that set a standard for civic engagement, and that, despite its flaws, remains a beacon for those who dare to dream of a better world. Rome, December 17th, a day that once kicked off a week of unbridled chaos in the heart of the Roman Empire. This was Saturnalia, the festival that made your office holiday party look like a quaint tea gathering. Named after Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture and time, it was the moment when the social order took a nosedive, and everyone pretended, for a brief, glorious moment, that they were on equal footing. It was a time when slaves dined like kings and kings, well, they had to pretend they liked it. Now, before you start dreaming of toga-wearing merriment, let's set the stage with some cold, hard facts. Saturnalia was not just a one-day affair. Starting on December 17th, the festival stretched on for 7 entire days, because one day of celebration just wasn't enough for the Romans. To put this in perspective, by the end of the week, most attendees probably couldn't remember how it began. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of universal joy and revelry. The heart of Saturnalia was a delightful concept, role reversal. Masters and slaves swapped places, with slaves being served by their masters at the table. But, hold your horses, this wasn't exactly a revolution. It was more like a temporary pass to a theme park called freedom, a fleeting fantasy that ended as soon as the last goblet of wine was drained. It was a brief, socially sanctioned topsy-turvy world that everyone knew wouldn't last. It was, as they say in Rome, panisse circenses, bread and circuses, a way to keep the masses entertained and distracted. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, money. Saturnalia wasn't just about fun and games, it had serious economic underpinnings. Gift-giving was a big part of the festivity, and while it might sound like a precursor to our modern-day Secret Santa, the reality was more complex. Gifts ranged from cheap trinkets to lavish presents depending on one's social standing. The wealthy would often give extravagant gifts, not just out of generosity, but as a display of their own wealth and status. It was less about the spirit of giving and more about the spirit of showing off. Think about it. When you're a wealthy Roman senator handing out gold coins or expensive jewelry, you're not just spreading holiday cheer, you're reinforcing your own position in society. It's like the ancient version of an Instagram influencer, but instead of likes, you got loyalty and political favors. For the average Roman citizen, though, it often meant squeezing their budget to keep up with the Joneses, or rather, the Julii. It was a time when social pressure could drain your purse faster than you could say, Ave Saturnalia. The festival's myth of universal merriment is a delightful story, but in truth, not everyone was laughing. Slaves might have enjoyed a day or two of better treatment, but they knew all too well that this was just a temporary illusion. The upper echelons of society might have indulged in heavy drinking and gambling, but they were the ones who could afford to lose a few sesterces. For the lower classes, Saturnalia was a reminder of the financial inequality that loomed over them, like the shadow of the Colosseum. Speaking of shadows, let's shed some light on the costs involved. The lavish feasts hosted during Saturnalia were not cheap. An average Roman feast could cost anywhere from 100 to 200 denarii, depending on the number of guests and the opulence of the spread. To put that in perspective, a Roman soldier earned about 300 denarii per year. So, hosting a Saturnalian feast was akin to spending half a year's salary on a single event. It was a financial burden that not everyone could bear, and yet the social pressure was immense. Now, let's debunk another myth. The idea that everyone in ancient Rome was living it up during Saturnalia is a bit of a stretch. Sure, the city was alive with festivities, but not everyone was thrilled. The Stoics, for example, weren't exactly fans of the debauchery that accompanied the holiday. Seneca the Younger, a philosopher who was probably the ancient equivalent of a Grinch, wrote about the unbridled enthusiasm of the festival and how it turned his normally quiet neighborhood into a cacophony of noise and revelry. Even the great poet Martial, known for his witty and often cutting epigrams, poked fun at the excesses of Saturnalia. In one of his poems, he wryly commented on the obligatory nature of gift-giving, suggesting that sometimes the gifts were more about obligation than affection. It seems the pressure to participate in Saturnalian festivities was as real and as overwhelming as the expectation to endure awkward small talk at your office party. So, while Saturnalia might seem like a week of joyous revelry, the reality was a tad more complicated. It was a time of temporary role reversal and economic display, where the wealthy flaunted their riches and the less fortunate scraped by. It was a festival filled with contradictions, a time when the lines between freedom and reality blurred, if only for a moment. Saturnalia was a mirror reflecting the social structure of ancient Rome, with all its grandeur and all its flaws. And as the final day of the festival rolled around, the Romans knew that the revelry would end, the roles would reverse once again, and the social order would be restored. Saturnalia was, in many ways, a microcosm of Roman society itself, chaotic, vibrant, and deeply rooted in its own traditions and hierarchies. It was a celebration of life in all its messy, imperfect glory, a week when the world turned upside down, only to settle back into its familiar rhythm once more. As the echoes of Saturnalia's revelry faded, the Romans didn't sit idle for long. Into the Ludi Romani, Rome's grand spectacle that made modern-day Super Bowls look like backyard scrimmages. If you think ancient Rome was all about stoic philosophers and toga-clad senators debating the meaning of life, well, you need to add chariot races and gladiatorial games to the mix. The Ludi Romani were the Roman Republic's way of saying, let's put on a show, and what a show it was. Picture this. A stadium packed with tens of thousands of Romans, eyes glued to the track, where chariots whirled around at breakneck speeds. The Circus Maximus, Rome's colossal venue, could hold around 150,000 spectators. That's nearly 3 times the capacity of the largest NFL stadiums today. The roar of the crowd was deafening, and the stakes were high, not just for the races, but for the politicians who bankrolled these events. You see, the Ludi Romani weren't just about entertainment. They were about power and influence. Politicians sponsored these games as a way to curry favour with the masses. Imagine your local mayor throwing a massive block party, complete with fireworks and a free concert just to secure your vote. The cost? Absolutely staggering. Organising such an event could set a politician back by hundreds of thousands of sesterces. To put that in perspective, that's like spending millions in today's currency. But the potential payoff in popularity and political leverage made it a price worth paying, at least for those who could afford it. And while the chariot races were the main event, the games wouldn't be complete without the blood and sweat of gladiatorial combat. Now, before you start romanticizing these warriors as ancient action heroes, let's sprinkle a bit of reality over that glossy image. Gladiators were often slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Their existence was brutal, and their chance of survival was, well, not great. The average lifespan of a gladiator was merely a few years. They were the rock stars of their day, sure, but with a life expectancy that was closer to a fruit fly's. In the arena, they fought not just for their lives but for the entertainment of the citizens and the glory of their masters. The Colosseum, which could host about 50,000 cheering Romans, was the stage for these deadly dramas. For the audience, it was a spectacle of bravery and skill. For the gladiators, it was survival of the fittest, with the odds stacked against them. Unlike the romanticized images of gladiators as muscular heroes, the reality was much harsher. Many were malnourished, and their training was less about building strength and more about becoming killing machines. So, why did these games persist? Because they served a crucial purpose: distraction. In a city as politically charged as Rome, keeping the populace entertained was a way to maintain order. It was the classic bread and circuses tactic, a way to keep the people happy and, more importantly, from revolting. The games were a pressure valve, a controlled release of the tensions simmering beneath the surface of Roman society. The cost of staging these games was astronomical, but so was the potential gain. For ambitious politicians, the Ludi Romani were an investment in their future. The populace, meanwhile, got a break from the daily grind, a chance to cheer, jeer, and forget their troubles for a while. It was a system that worked, albeit in its own brutal, chaotic way. But let's not kid ourselves about the supposed glory of the arena. The games were violent, bloody, and often lethal. They were a display of power, not just to the gladiators but of the society that demanded such spectacles. The appeal lay in the raw, unfiltered nature of the combat, the thrill of watching life and death unfold before your eyes. It was reality TV before reality TV was a thing, with the stakes quite literally being life or death. In essence, the Ludi Romani were a celebration of Roman strength and dominance both in the arena and on the political stage. They were a way for the elite to showcase their wealth and influence, while the masses indulged in the visceral excitement of the games. It was a world where life was cheap, and entertainment came at a high price, both for those who staged the games and for those who fought in them. So, as the dust settled on the chariot tracks and the blood dried in the Colosseum, Rome's citizens returned to their lives, having witnessed the grand spectacle of the Ludi Romani. It was a tradition that reflected the complexity of Roman society, a blend of power, politics, and the primal urge for entertainment. And as the games continued year after year, they would remain a testament to the enduring, if not brutal, spirit of ancient Rome. And as the echoes of gladiators battling for their lives faded, the Romans turned their attention to the more solemn, yet equally captivating Vestalia festival. If Saturnalia was Rome's version of Mardi Gras, then Vestalia was its high-stakes, no-nonsense Oscars, where the Vestal virgins played starring roles. These women were not your average toga-clad citizens. They were the custodians of Rome's sacred flame, a job that required more than just a steady hand. Their role was steeped in religious significance, and let's just say, the stakes were scorching. The Vestalia festival unfolded every June, running from the 7th to the 15th, a 9-day affair that saw the city turn its gaze toward the Temple of Vesta. This was no ordinary structure. The temple housed the eternal flame, symbolizing the heart of Rome itself, and the Vestal virgins ensured it never went out. Think of them as the ancient world's most exclusive sorority, with a membership that came with both privilege and peril. These women were chosen for a 30-year term, starting as young as 6 years old, a commitment that makes your average job contract seem like a weekend gig. Being a Vestal came with perks that would turn any Roman's head. They had front-row seats at the games, rode in chariots, and even had a reserved spot at banquets. But before you envy their lifestyle, let's talk about the fine print. The Vestals had to maintain their chastity, a vow that was as serious as a heart attack. Breaking it meant a dreadful end, buried alive in the Campus Celeratus, a grim reminder that Roman society wasn't messing around. No pressure, right? Now, here's the kicker. In a society where women were often seen and not heard, the Vestals wielded a surprising amount of power. They could own property, free slaves, and testify in court, privileges that even married women couldn't claim. Their unique position in society was a curious mix of reverence and control. They were untouchable, yet their lives were tightly regulated. It was a classic case of, be careful what you wish for. The festival itself was a curious blend of solemnity and celebration. It began with the opening of the sacred penis, Vestae, the inner sanctum of the temple, to the public, a rare opportunity for the average Roman to glimpse the divine. Citizens flocked to the temple, bringing offerings of wheat and salt, symbolic of Vesta's role as the goddess of the hearth and home. Now, before you start thinking this was just an ancient bake sale, remember that these offerings were a serious business. The Vestals had to ensure everything was in place, like the most intense episode of Iron Chef with divine stakes. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. In a patriarchal society, the Vestals stood as a testament to the power of women, albeit within a tightly controlled framework. They were both revered and feared, a symbol of purity and Rome's eternal stability. But this duality came with its own set of challenges. The pressure to remain flawless was immense, and any slip-up could lead to disaster. It was like walking a tightrope over a pit of lions with the entire city watching. The economic impact of Vestalia was another layer of complexity. While the festival itself wasn't a lavish affair like Saturnalia, it did stimulate the local economy. Merchants selling offerings and trinkets made a tidy profit, and the influx of visitors to the city meant more business for inns and taverns. It was a reminder that even the most sacred events had their economic undercurrents, a dance between piety and practicality. As the festival progressed, the Romans were treated to a spectacle of ritual and reverence. The Vestals, draped in their distinctive white robes, performed ceremonies that were as much about show as they were about faith. The tension between public expectation and personal devotion was palpable, a reminder that even in ancient times, image was everything. And while Rome's citizens might have romanticized the purity and power of the Vestals, the reality was far more nuanced. So, what was the allure of the Vestals? Why did they capture the imagination of ancient Rome and continue to fascinate us today? Perhaps it was their enigmatic blend of power and vulnerability, their ability to navigate a world that demanded so much yet offered so little in return. They were a paradox, a reflection of a society that revered its traditions while grappling with its contradictions. And as the Vestalia festival came to a close, the flame in the temple of Vesta continued to burn, a symbol of Rome's unyielding spirit. The Vestals returned to their duties, their lives a delicate balance of privilege and peril. For the Romans, the festival was a reminder of the divine forces that shaped their world, a moment to pause and reflect on the fragility of their existence. Yet the story of the Vestal virgins doesn't end here. Their legacy is woven into the fabric of Roman history, a testament to the complexities of power, faith, and gender in an ancient world. As we look back on this chapter of history, we're reminded that the past is never as distant as it seems, and the echoes of ancient Rome continue to resonate in our modern world. So, as the eternal flame flickers on, the tale of the Vestals remains a captivating glimpse into the heart of a civilization that was anything but ordinary. And speaking of captivating glimpses into ancient Rome, let's pivot from the sacred to the strategic with the Feriae Latinae, a festival that wasn't about wild parties or chariot races, but rather the serious business of political maneuvering. Imagine a gathering where Rome's movers and shakers rubbed shoulders with leaders from the Latin tribes. It was like the GCM and summit of the ancient world, minus the photo ops and diplomatic dinners, but with plenty of political intrigue. The Feriae Latinae, or the Latin Festival, was an annual affair that brought together Roman and Latin leaders in a grand display of diplomacy. Held at the temple of Jupiter Latiaris on the Alban Mount, just a stone's throw from Rome, this festival was as much about religious rites as it was about forging alliances. Picture a scene where priests and politicians mingled, sacrifices were offered, and the air buzzed with the hum of negotiations. It was diplomacy served with a side of sacrificial lamb. Now, why did this festival matter? Well, in a world where borders were more flexible than a Roman acrobat, keeping your neighbours friendly was crucial. The Feriae Latinae was a chance to renew old alliances and hammer out new ones, ensuring that Rome's grip on power remained firm. It was like an annual check-in, where everyone could air grievances, settle disputes, and, hopefully, leave with a handshake and a treaty. Let's talk numbers for a moment, because nothing says serious business like statistics. The festival took place on a grand scale, with each participating city contributing cattle to the sacrificial feast. The number of cattle sacrificed was symbolic, reflecting the city's standing and its commitment to the alliance. It was an ancient version of keeping up appearances, proving that your city was as invested in the alliance as the next, and here's where the economic context comes into play. The Ferii Latinae wasn't just an opportunity for political posturing, it was also a chance to boost local economies. Imagine the influx of visitors descending on the Alban Mount, merchants hawking their goods, and inns filled to the brim. It was a festival that, quite literally, paid dividends, adding a financial incentive to the political and religious motivations. But let's debunk a common myth, the idea that these gatherings were all smiles and goodwill. In reality, the Ferii Latinae could be as tense as a high-stakes poker game. Behind the facade of unity, there were rivalries simmering beneath the surface. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy, where a misstep could mean the difference between peace and conflict. Leaders had to navigate this political minefield with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, ensuring their city's interests were protected without stepping on too many toes. And speaking of toes, let's not forget the practical realities of hosting such an event. Logistically, the Ferii Latinae was a massive undertaking. The roads leading to the Alban Mount would be clogged with travellers, the local infrastructure stretched to its limits. It was a testament to the organizational prowess of the Romans, who somehow managed to pull off this grand spectacle year after year. Now, you might wonder why this festival isn't as famous as the gladiatorial games or the bacchanalian revels of Saturnalia. Perhaps it's because the drama of diplomacy doesn't quite capture the imagination like a chariot race or a gladiator's fight to the death. But make no mistake, the stakes were just as high, if not higher. The outcome of these negotiations could shape the political landscape of the region, influencing everything from trade to military alliances. In essence, the Ferii Latinae was a celebration of political pragmatism, a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, Roman-style alliances were as valuable as armies. It was a festival that encapsulated the complexities of power, where religious rituals intertwined with realpolitik in a dance as old as civilization itself. Yet, the Ferii Latinae was more than just a political meeting. It was a reflection of Rome's ability to adapt and integrate, to forge connections and build a network of allies. It showcased the city's knack for diplomacy, a skill that would serve it well as it expanded its influence across the Italian peninsula and beyond. So, as the smoke from the sacrificial fires curled into the sky, the leaders of Rome and the Latin tribes would depart from the Alban Mount, their minds buzzing with new agreements and renewed alliances. The Ferii Latinae had played its part for another year, reinforcing the bonds that held this ancient world together. But the story of Rome doesn't end with diplomacy. As we look ahead, the city that mastered the art of negotiation would soon find itself facing new challenges and opportunities as it continued its relentless march towards empire. Stay tuned for more tales of ambition, power, and the indomitable spirit of ancient Rome. As Rome continued its relentless march towards empire, it left behind a legacy that wasn't just chiseled into stone, but also etched into the cultural DNA of societies yet to be born. The Romans loved their festivals and rituals, and let's be honest, who wouldn't? These events were a heady cocktail of religion, politics, and social theatre. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you might be surprised to find that echoes of these ancient celebrations still resonate in our modern world. You see, the Romans weren't just laying down roads, they were paving the way for a cultural legacy that would transcend time, sneaking into our calendars and social customs like an ancient Trojan horse. Take our modern calendar, for instance. Ever wondered why July and August have 31 days each? You can thank Julius Caesar and Emperor Augustus for that little quirk. In their quest for eternal glory, they decided that their months should have just as many days as any other. It's a classic case of my month is bigger than your month, and it's why February gets the short end of the stick every year. This calendar, known as the Julian calendar, was introduced in 45 BCE and remained in use until it was fine-tuned by Pope Gregory XIII in 1502. but the influence of those Roman emperors is stamped all over our modern-day planners. Let's not forget about the festival of Saturnalia, arguably the ancestor of our Christmas and New Year celebrations. Sure, the details have changed. Most of us aren't swapping roles with our bosses or tossing toga parties. Yet, the spirit of feasting, gift-giving, and a brief respite from the social order persists. The Romans knew the value of a good time, and their revelries taught us that sometimes the best way to endure the harshest of winters is with a bit of festive cheer and a cup of warmed wine, or as they called it, culder. Then there's Lupercalia, a festival that would make even the most ardent Valentine's Day enthusiast blush. Held every February 15th, this was a wild celebration of fertility, purification, and, let's face it, an excuse to get a little rowdy. Young men would run through the streets, lightly whipping women with strips of goat hide to promote fertility. Romantic? Perhaps not by today's standards, but it certainly made Cupid's job a bit more straightforward. Over time, as Christianity spread through the empire, this festival evolved, eventually giving us the much tamer, Hallmark-approved Valentine's Day. Our fascination with gladiators and the Colosseum's blood-soaked sands has morphed into a love for sports and reality TV. The spectacle of athletes pushing themselves to the limit in front of cheering crowds is a direct descendant of those ancient games. Sure, the stakes aren't quite life or death, at least not usually, but the essence of competition and the thrill of the audience remain unchanged. It's a testament to the Romans' understanding of entertainment. Give the people a spectacle, and they'll give you their loyalty. Speaking of loyalty, the Ludi Romani, with its grand chariot races, mirrors today's political rallies and public spectacles. Politicians still understand the value of putting on a good show to win public support, whether it's through a rousing speech, a patriotic parade, or a well-placed photo op. The Romans were masters of public engagement, and their tactics echo through the ages, reminding us that while the players may have changed, the game remains much the same. Yet it's not just the pageantry that has lingered. The solemnity of Vestalia turned the spotlight on the power dynamics within society, a theme that continues to resonate. The Vestal virgins, revered yet bound by their vows, symbolize the complex intersection of gender and authority, a narrative still relevant in today's discussions about gender roles and societal expectations. The Vestals remind us that power often comes with strings attached, a lesson as pertinent now as it was back then. As we sift through the ruins of Roman festivals, it's clear that they were more than just parties and politics. They were reflections of their society's values, ambitions, and contradictions. The myths surrounding them, while often romanticized, hold a mirror to our own desires for connection and meaning. We are drawn to the stories of grandeur and revelry even as we acknowledge the stark realities they concealed. It's a dance between myth and reality, where the allure of legend often masks the grittier truths. So, what does this mean for us? As we look back at these ancient festivities, it's a reminder of the timeless human desire to celebrate life, to connect with others, and to find joy amidst the mundane. Our festivals, whether steeped in tradition or newly invented, serve as milestones that punctuate the passage of time, offering us moments of respite, reflection, and renewal. In the end, the legacy of Roman festivals is not just found in the remnants of temples or the faded inscriptions on stone. It's alive in our calendars, our celebrations, and our collective imagination. The Romans may have fallen, but their influence endures, a testament to the power of culture to transcend the centuries. As we raise a glass to history, let's toast to the enduring spirit of celebration that connects us to those who came before and those who will come after. After all, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and that's a cause for celebration in itself. If you've ever glanced at a Viking sword or a weathered stone in a Scandinavian museum, you've likely seen Norse runes. These angular, stick-figure symbols seem as cryptic as a modern-day teenager's text message. But, oh, they've got tales to tell and myths to bust, so grab your metaphorical horned helmet. Yes, that's a myth too. And let's dig into the origins of these ancient characters. Runes first made their mark, pun intended, around 150 AD. They emerged as a new alphabet for the Germanic tribes, who decided it was about time they stopped grunting and waving sticks and started writing things down. These tribes were scattered across northern Europe, where the weather was as harsh as their war cries and as unpredictable as the plots of daytime TV dramas. They needed a way to keep records, manage trade, and perhaps send the odd love letter or two. Enter runes, practical, straightforward, and as sharp as a Viking's axe. Forget any romantic notions of magical symbols whispered to Odin by the gods themselves. Runes were more like the post-it notes of the ancient world. Sure, they could be inscribed on stones, metal, and wood, but they were fundamentally an alphabet, a tool for communication and record-keeping. Think less. Harry Potter and more. Ancient Excel spreadsheet. Now, before we pop the bubble of magic entirely, let's acknowledge the allure. It's true that runes have been linked to mystical stories and esoteric rituals, and who doesn't love a good mystery? The idea of secret messages and spells is just too juicy to resist. But, spoiler alert, the truth is often less glamorous. The bulk of runic inscriptions we've found are about as magical as a grocery list. Buy more fish and fix the roof aren't exactly incantations for eternal life. Runes were carved primarily for practical purposes. They were the text messages of their time, short, direct, and often mundane. Picture a Viking trader in the bustling market of Hedeby, the quintessential Norse Costco, using runes to jot down how many furs he'd swapped for grain. In this, runes played a crucial role in facilitating trade across the harsh landscapes of northern Europe. Traders could travel from the fjords of Norway to the shores of England, all the while keeping track of their deals and debts, marked in runic script. The runic alphabet, or Futhark as it's called, named after its first 6 letters, just like alphabet, comes from alpha and beta, consisted of 24 characters. Simple, right? But don't be fooled by its brevity. This compact set was as versatile as a Swiss Army knife, able to convey everything from the mundane to the profound, though mostly sticking to the mundane. But why runes? And why then? Around 150 AD, the Roman Empire was busy expanding its borders and flexing its military might, while the Germanic tribes were just trying to keep warm and avoid getting conquered. As they came into contact with the Romans, they saw the effectiveness of written communication. Inspired, they adapted the Roman script into something more angular and easily carved into stone or wood. Hence the birth of runes. These runes weren't just carved willy-nilly. The shapes were designed for practical reasons. Imagine trying to carve a lowercase e into a slab of granite with a primitive chisel. It's not going to end well. The runes' angular forms were perfect for carving into hard surfaces, a necessity in a world where paper was as mythical as a friendly dragon. Now, let's talk about those myths. The idea that runes were primarily magical symbols is about as accurate as saying the internet is just for cat videos. Yes, there were some inscriptions that seemed to have mystical purposes, but they were the exception, not the rule. Most runes were about as magical as your average IKEA manual, useful, but not exactly the stuff of legends. Of course, the allure of magic isn't entirely misplaced. The Vikings, with their penchant for the dramatic, did indeed use runes in rituals and ceremonies. But here's the twist. These uses were likely more about psychological impact than actual sorcery. Imagine a Viking warrior steeling himself for battle, carving a rune for protection into his shield. Whether it worked or not, the act itself could boost his confidence, a placebo effect that predates even the snake oil salesman of the Wild West. In the end, runes were as much a part of everyday life for the Norse as smartphones are for us today. They were practical tools, essential for trade, communication, and yes, even the occasional mystical ritual. They were the means by which the Norse navigated their world, both physically and spiritually, though mostly they just navigated their shopping lists. So next time you see a rune, remember, beneath the layers of myth and magic lies a practical tool that helped the Norse do what they did best, thrive in a world as tough and unforgiving as a Viking's handshake. And if that's not a legend worth telling, I don't know what is. So when you look at a rune, remember there's more than meets the eye, kind of like a peculiar blend of ancient magic and a Norseman's daily planner. But hold on to your horn helmets, which, by the way, were mostly a 19th century fiction, because these runes are about to show a whole new side. Beyond their function as the Viking version of a notepad, runes were steeped in symbolic significance. Each rune wasn't just a letter, it was a symbol packed with meaning, history, and yes, a bit of that irresistible mythology. Take the rune, Fehu, for instance. To the Norse, it meant cattle, wealth, and prosperity. In a society where wealth was measured in livestock, and not in how many likes your post gets, This rune was akin to a modern-day dollar sign. Cattle were a walking bank account, and carving Fehu wasn't just about writing a letter, it was invoking prosperity and abundance. The symbolic power of runes wasn't just for show, it had practical applications too. A rune could influence a trade deal or even a warrior's morale. Imagine a Viking merchant at the bustling Birka market carving Fehu to seal a deal. It wasn't just a transaction, it was a statement of intent, a declaration of prosperity amidst the clinking of coins and the bartering for furs and amber. And in a world where oral contracts were as binding as a pinky promise, a carved rune could stand as a solemn vow. It was cultural currency at its finest. But let's not get too carried away with the notion of runes as the one-stop shop for all your Norse societal needs. While some runes could bring good fortune, others like Isa, meaning ice, could signify stagnation or obstacles. Nothing says your plans are frozen, quite like a rune associated with ice, right? The symbolism wasn't just a random selection of symbols, but deeply tied to the everyday experiences and natural world the Norse navigated. It's like nature writing back, a constant reminder that Mother Earth had her own way of keeping things in check. Now, the mystical allure of runes didn't stop at trade and social dealings. Oh no, the Norse were all about adding a dash of drama to their rituals and divination practices. Picture a seer, draped in furs, casting runes to predict the outcome of a battle or the success of a harvest. The runes told a story, each one a chapter in the unfolding saga of possibility and fate. They were the Norse tarot cards, cryptic yet compelling, speaking in the language of fate to those willing to listen. But here's a twist in the tale. The idea of runes as mystical tools of divination is a more modern interpretation. While the Norse did use them ritually, their primary function was practical. The ritualistic use of runes was more about psychological reinforcement than supernatural foresight. Think of it as a Viking pep talk before the big game. Carving algaes for protection or taiwaz for victory was a way of channeling focus and determination, much like a modern athlete might visualize winning before a match. It was about harnessing the power of belief, not bending the cosmos to one's will. And in case you're wondering how these symbols came to be so versatile, credit goes to a cultural hodgepodge that would make any modern fusion chef proud. The Germanic tribes were no strangers to adapting and evolving. As they traded and traveled across Europe, they absorbed influences from the Roman alphabet and other scripts, creating a unique system that was as flexible as it was functional. The runic alphabet was a living, breathing entity, evolving with the times and the tides of history. Of course, the economic implications of these runes cannot be overlooked. In a society where personal reputation was as valuable as a chest of silver, the right rune at the right time could sway opinions and solidify alliances. In the high-stakes world of Viking trade, where goods like walrus tusks and fine silks from Byzantium were at play, a rune's meaning could tip the scales. Imagine the social capital of being known as a merchant who carved Fehu with every deal, a sign of trust and prosperity that would make even the most skeptical trader pause. Yet, let's not get too idealistic. The reality was that the power of runes, like much of Norse life, was subject to the whims of fate and fortune. A carved rune might promise prosperity, but it couldn't prevent a shipwreck or a failed harvest. In this way, the runes were a reflection of the Norse worldview acceptance of fate with a dash of hopeful intention. They were a testament to the Norse spirit, pragmatic yet ever hopeful, navigating the turbulent waters of life with a bit of belief in the power of a carved symbol. As we delve deeper into these symbols, it becomes clear that the runes were more than just a method of communication. They were a bridge between the mundane and the mystical, a testament to the Norse ability to find meaning in the everyday. They captured the essence of a society that thrived in harsh conditions, finding beauty and purpose in simplicity. Each rune was a piece of a larger puzzle, a single note in the symphony of Norse life that continues to echo through history. As we leave this part of the saga, let's keep in mind that the runes were more than mere etchings. They were a window into the soul of a people who knew how to live large while understanding the limits of their world. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries and realities of these timeless symbols. As we leave this part of the saga, let's keep in mind that the runes were more than mere etchings. They were a window into the soul of a people who knew how to live large while understanding the limits of their world. But hang on to your drinking horns, because we're about to dive into how these runes weren't just ancient post-it notes or mystical mood enhancers. Oh no, they were also the Twitter of their time, tools of power, propaganda, and persuasion wielded by Viking rulers who, contrary to cinematic depictions, were far from illiterate berserkers swinging axes without a thought in their heads. Now, let's set the scene. Viking Age Europe, a time when the political landscape was as cutthroat as a Viking raid on a Saxon village. The runes were more than just alphabetic symbols. They were instruments of influence and control, used by chieftains and kings to assert authority, secure alliances, and sometimes even to intimidate. Think of them as the original press releases, carved in stone rather than typed on a laptop. They were permanent proclamations in a world where the spoken word was as fickle as the North Sea weather. Take, for instance, the legendary runestone of King Harold Bluetooth. Yes, the guy who gave your wireless earbuds their name. Around 965 AD, Harold erected the Jelling stones in Denmark, which can be thought of as the medieval equivalent of a social media profile update, broadcasting his achievements to the world. Carved into these stones was a message declaring his unification of Denmark and Norway, as well as his conversion of the Danes to Christianity. This wasn't just a humble brag, it was a political masterstroke. By carving this message into stone, Harold was literally setting his legacy in stone, making sure that his story would last far longer than any bard's memory. Speaking of memory, let's debunk the myth that these Viking leaders were illiterate warriors who couldn't tell a rune from a rabbit hole. The truth is, literacy among the Norse elite was more common than once thought. Sure, they may not have been penning epic poetry in their spare time, but they understood the power of the written word, or, in their case, the carved rune. The ability to read and write runes was a skill that gave them a significant edge in both domestic and foreign affairs. It was an asset in a world where knowledge was power, and power was everything. Runes were not just about political grandstanding either. They played a crucial role in legal and economic matters. In a society where a man's word was his bond, a runic inscription could serve as a binding contract. For example, the Björketorp runestone in Sweden carries a cautionary tale of curses and consequences, warning anyone who might dare to destroy the stone of dire magic retribution. While this sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, it was essentially an ancient legal notice. In a world without notarized documents, a runestone served as a public declaration with the weight of law behind it. But let's not get too carried away with the idea that these runic inscriptions were purely about high-minded legalities and political machinations. They could be used for more nefarious purposes too. Picture a Viking chieftain using runes to spread a bit of propaganda, much like a modern politician might use a carefully worded press release to sway public opinion. Runes were a means to an end, whether that end was rallying troops for battle or persuading neighbouring tribes to form alliances. Consider the political landscape of Viking Age Scandinavia, a patchwork quilt of petty kingdoms, each vying for dominance. The ability to communicate effectively was as crucial as a strong sword arm. Runes allowed leaders to broadcast messages across distances, uniting disparate groups under a single banner. This was particularly important in an era when alliances could shift as swiftly as the tides, and a well-timed message could mean the difference between peace and war. The economic context of runic communication cannot be overstated. In a society where trade was the lifeblood of prosperity, the ability to document transactions and agreements was invaluable. Runes allowed for the recording of debts, the marking of property, and even the issuing of contracts. They were the scribes of the Viking world, ensuring that business dealings were as transparent as possible in an age before receipts and invoices. But let's not put all the runestones on a pedestal. The reality is, much like today, not every message carved in stone was a work of political genius or a legal masterpiece. Some were mere scribbles, the ancient equivalent of graffiti. In fact, one of the most famous runestones, the Rök stone in Sweden, appears to be an elaborate riddle, a mix of historical narrative and cryptic puzzle, perhaps intended to showcase the wit and intelligence of its creator or simply to amuse passers-by. Yet, beneath this veneer of entertainment lies a deeper truth. Runes were a reflection of the society that used them. They were a tool that could be wielded for good or ill, for war or peace, for truth or deception. They were as versatile as the people who carved them, and their legacy is a testament to the Norse ability to adapt and innovate in the face of a challenging world. So next time you see a runestone, remember that beneath its weathered surface lies a story of power and persuasion, of politics and pragmatism. It's a reminder that the Vikings were more than just marauders. They were master communicators, skilled in the art of the message, whether that message was carved in stone or carried on the wind. As we continue our journey through the world of runes, keep in mind that we're not just exploring ancient symbols, we're uncovering the very fabric of a society that knew how to wield words as skillfully as they wielded swords. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this saga of symbols and secrets, revealing more of the intricate dance between myth and reality. Now, let's shift gears from the runic rock stars of political propaganda to the sobering tale of their decline, a decline as inevitable as a Norse winter night. As we approach the twilight of the Viking Age, around 1000 AD, something seismic was happening across Europe. Christianity was spreading faster than a cat meme on the internet. Suddenly, the old gods were out, and the Latin alphabet was in, sweeping through Scandinavia like a holy tidal wave. This was not just a change in spiritual direction, it was a cultural earthquake that would shake the very foundations of Norse society. So, why did runes get the short end of the stick? Well, let's start with the obvious. Christianity came with its own set of symbols and scripts. The Latin alphabet was not just a tool of communication, but a badge of belonging in the Christian world. If you were a Norse chieftain looking to rub elbows with the bishops and kings of Europe, you didn't do it by scrawling runes on a rock. No, you needed to embrace the Latin script, your ticket to the club of Christendom. But let's not lay all the blame at the feet of Latin letters. The Christian Church wasn't just swapping scripts, it was rewriting the narrative. Runes, with their pagan roots, were increasingly cast as relics of a barbaric past. They became the ancient equivalent of last season's fashion, outdated and slightly embarrassing. The Church, ever the adept PR machine, knew that to conquer the hearts and minds of the Norse, they needed to recast the old symbols as sinister. Runes were demonized as tools of witchcraft and superstition, their mystical allure recast as malevolent magic. In a world newly baptized, the runes found themselves out in the cold, like a Norseman who'd forgotten his cloak. It's easy to romanticize this as a clash of civilizations, but the reality was more mundane. This was an era when consolidation of power often rode on the back of religious conversion. For the Norse elite, adopting Christianity, and with it the Latin script, was a strategic move. It wasn't just about saving souls, it was about saving face in a world where political alliances were forged in the fires of faith. The Latin alphabet became the lingua franca of diplomacy and governance, a versatile tool for a new era. Meanwhile, our old friends, the runes, were relegated to the realm of folklore and forgotten spells. But before we start playing the funeral dirge for runes, let's look at the archaeological evidence, which tells a story that's more nuanced than a simple tale of disappearance. In fact, runes adapted to survive in some rather unexpected ways. Archaeological digs in places like Sweden and Norway have uncovered runic inscriptions on Christian gravestones from as late as the 15th century. These stones are like historical selfies, capturing the transition from paganism to Christianity. It's a bit like seeing a Viking wearing a cross necklace while still sporting a Thor's hammer tattoo, a cultural mashup that speaks volumes about the complexity of this period. And here's where the runic tale takes an intriguing twist. While the Latin script became the dominant form of written communication, runes found a niche in magical and folkloric contexts. The very thing that led to their decline, their association with the mystical, also ensured their survival in certain pockets of society. Think of them as the ancient world's version of your quirky uncle's vinyl collection, a little old-fashioned, a touch mysterious, but still holding a certain charm. In fact, some runes took on new life as symbols of resistance against the encroaching tide of Christianity. In Iceland, for example, runic inscriptions were used well into the 17th century as part of secretive rituals that harkened back to the old gods. These were the rebels of the runic world, carving their defiance into stone and wood in an act of cultural preservation. It was a quiet rebellion, carved in secret, a whispered reminder of a world that was fading away. And let's not overlook the economic backdrop to this cultural shift. The adoption of the Latin script was not just a religious or political maneuver, it was also an economic one. As the Norse integrated into the burgeoning Christian trade network, the ability to read and write Latin became a valuable skill. It was the ancient equivalent of learning English today, a gateway to commerce and communication across borders. The Latin alphabet opened doors that runes simply couldn't, making it a necessary tool for any upwardly mobile Norseman looking to make his mark. Yet, even as Latin became the new language of power, runes lingered on the fringes, a testament to their enduring appeal. They appeared in unexpected places, from the graffiti carved by bored scribes on church walls to the secret messages hidden in the margins of medieval manuscripts. These were the echoes of a script that refused to be silenced, whispers from the past that spoke of a time when the world was a little wilder, a little more mysterious. As we draw this chapter to a close, let's not forget that the story of runes is far from over. They may have faded from the forefront of history, but they left an indelible mark on the Norse psyche, a reminder of a world where the lines between the mystical and the mundane were blurred, and where a simple carved symbol could hold the weight of a king's decree or a warrior's last wish. So, as we continue our journey through the saga of runes, let's keep our eyes peeled for these ancient symbols in all their forms. From the gravestones of medieval Scandinavia to the spellbooks of later centuries, runes have a way of cropping up when you least expect them. They are the ghosts of a forgotten era, haunting the edges of history with their angular forms and cryptic messages. And in that haunting, there is a story waiting to be told, a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of the written word. Stay tuned, because the saga is far from over. As we continue our journey through the saga of runes, let's keep our eyes peeled for these ancient symbols in all their forms. From the gravestones of medieval Scandinavia to the spellbooks of later centuries, runes have a way of cropping up when you least expect them. They are the ghosts of a forgotten era, haunting the edges of history with their angular forms and cryptic messages. And in that haunting, there is a story waiting to be told, a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of the written word. Stay tuned, because the saga is far from over. Fast forward to the present day, and runes are experiencing a remarkable renaissance, much like a rock band that splits up only to reunite for a sold-out tour decades later. The revival of interest in these ancient symbols is akin to discovering your favorite childhood toy in the attic. Nostalgic, yes, but also imbued with a newfound appreciation for its craftsmanship and history. Runes have re-emerged in modern media and popular culture, where they're often portrayed as mystical and mysterious, a blend of ancient wisdom and otherworldly power. They've become the go-to symbols in fantasy novels, video games, and movies, from J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth to the sprawling worlds of The Witcher and Assassin's Creed. But let's not get too caught up in the glamour of Hollywood's version of runes. The reality is that these symbols were more likely to be found on an ancient grocery list than a wizard's spellbook. So why do runes continue to captivate us? What is it about these angular symbols that speaks to the modern imagination? Part of the allure is undoubtedly their appearance. They look like they belong to a world filled with secrets and stories, a world where heroes and gods walked the earth. But beyond their visual appeal, runes offer a tantalizing glimpse into a past that feels both foreign and familiar. They're a reminder of a time when the written word was a rare and powerful thing, capable of preserving history and shaping futures. And speaking of futures, runes have left their mark on more than just pop culture. They've also influenced contemporary alphabets, serving as a bridge between ancient and modern scripts. The most obvious example is the Anglo-Saxon runic alphabet, which evolved into the Old English script and eventually contributed to the development of the modern English alphabet. While the runes themselves may have faded into the background, their legacy continues to shape the way we communicate today. The economic impact of runes can't be ignored either. In the Viking Age, being able to carve runes was akin to having a degree in business management and public relations. Runes facilitated trade, documented legal agreements, and even served as early forms of branding. Today, they've become a cultural commodity, sold on everything from jewelry and home decor to tattoos and t-shirts. It's a commercial revival that would make any Viking trader proud, proving that even ancient symbols can find new life in the modern marketplace. Of course, the romanticized revival of runes isn't without its challenges. There's a fine line between appreciating history and appropriating it, between honoring the past and commercializing it. As runes become increasingly popular, there's a risk of losing sight of their true historical context. It's easy to get swept up in the magic and mystery, but it's essential to remember that these symbols were born out of practical necessity and cultural evolution. They were tools of communication, not just talismans of power. So, while we indulge in the fantasy of runes, let's also take a moment to appreciate their reality. The allure of runes lies not just in their mystique, but in their ability to connect us to a shared human experience. They remind us that even in a world as technologically advanced as ours, there's still something profoundly powerful about the written word. Whether etched in stone or typed on a screen, words have the power to shape our world, to tell our stories, and to ensure that our voices are heard. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of runes, let's consider how history is shaped by the narratives we choose to tell. The romanticized image of the Viking warrior, the mystic seer, the wise chieftain. These are stories that capture our imagination, but they're not the whole truth. The real power of runes lies in their role as witnesses to history, silent yet eloquent, offering insights into the lives and beliefs of the people who created them. They are a testament to the resilience of human culture, to our ability to adapt, to communicate, and to leave our mark on the world. So, next time you see a rune, whether in a museum, a movie, or etched into the skin of a tattooed arm, remember the journey it has taken to reach you. From the windswept shores of ancient Scandinavia to the bustling streets of modern cities, runes continue to speak to us, carrying with them the echoes of a distant past. They are a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a collection of stories, each one waiting to be discovered, understood, and retold. And with that, we leave the runes to rest, not as relics of a forgotten age, but as vibrant symbols of a living history. They are the threads that connect us to our ancestors, the links that bind us to the past, and the guides that help us navigate the complexities of the present. May we continue to learn from them, to be inspired by them, and to carry their stories forward into the future. After all, in a world that's constantly changing, perhaps the most enduring legacy of all is the ability to adapt, to evolve, and to find meaning in the symbols we create. So, here's to the runes, a timeless tale of communication, connection, and the indomitable spirit of the human story. In a time when the most advanced technology was a pointy stick, the Sumerians were busy building the world's first legal system. Yeah, you heard that right. While everyone else was still figuring out how to not starve, these guys were laying down the law, and not just any laws that would echo through the ages all the way to your local courthouse. Let's dive into the clay-caked origins of Sumerian justice, a place where the ink wasn't ink at all, but rather mud on a tablet. Let's set the stage in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia around 2005 to 2050 BCE. The Sumerians, known for their ziggurats and cuneiform, were also the brains behind the code of Ur-Nammu. This isn't just any old list of do's and don'ts, it's the earliest known legal code. And no, it wasn't just about an eye for an eye. That's Hammurabi's gig centuries later. Ur-Nammu's code was surprisingly civilized, opting for fines over physical retaliation. So, next time someone tells you ancient justice was all about brutal retribution, feel free to correct them with a bit of Sumerian flair. Now, let's talk about those clay tablets. Forget about your fancy PDFs or legal pads. The Sumerians were working with clay and a stylus, which makes you wonder how many ridiculous autocorrect errors they had to deal with. These clay tablets were the original hard drives, storing everything from legal decrees to beer recipes, because priorities. And while clay might seem like an odd choice, it was actually pretty effective. Durable, cheap, and readily available. A bit like the IKEA furniture of ancient record-keeping. The Code of Ur-Nammu includes around 57 laws, give or take a few fragments lost to time. These laws covered everything from theft to marriage, showing that even 4,000 years ago, humans were still trying to figure out how to live with each other without resorting to chaos. One standout feature of Ur-Nammu's code is the use of fines as punishment. Steal a sheep? That'll be a fine of 10 shekels. In modern terms, this might be likened to a pricey parking ticket, but it beats losing a limb. It's a glimpse into a society that preferred financial incentives over medieval-style mutilation. A refreshing change from the usual tales of ancient brutality. While the Code of Ur-Nammu might not make for the most riveting read, Think tax code rather than thriller novel, its impact was profound. It laid the groundwork for future civilizations to refine and expand legal systems. These laws were a step toward organized governance and societal norms, proving that even in ancient Sumer, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about creating order from the chaos. But why does this matter? In a world where law and order can often feel like an abstract concept, tracing its roots back to ancient Sumer offers a tangible link to our past. It reminds us that the quest for justice and fairness is as old as civilization itself, and while the tools may have changed, the fundamental questions remain the same. How do we live together without tearing each other apart? As we continue to explore the Sumerians' legal landscape, it's crucial to recognize that these early laws were more than just a collection of rules. They were a reflection of a society grappling with power, property, and the human condition. They reveal a people striving for fairness and stability, even amid the unpredictability of the ancient world. In short, the Sumerians were not just the first to write things down, they were among the first to try and make sense of it all. So next time you're grumbling over a speeding ticket, just remember, it's all part of a long tradition started by some very clever people with clay tablets and a vision. The Sumerians, bless their ancient hearts, weren't just content with scribbling down laws, they were crafting a societal structure as complex as a modern state's budget report. But before you start imagining a scene from Game of Thrones, let's break down the real deal: city-states, temples, and a king who was less of a tyrant and more of a guy trying to keep the divine favor while balancing the Sumerian equivalent of a cabinet meeting. At the heart of Sumer were its city-states, each a self-contained universe of mud-brick ziggurats and bustling markets. These were no sprawling empires, but rather compact communities, each fiercely independent and governed by its own set of norms. The city-state was the heartbeat of Sumerian life, and it functioned more like a modern-day city council than a centralized empire. Think of each city-state as a tiny sovereign nation, where the local ruler was often more of an administrator than a despot. Sure, they wore the crown, but their power was checked by councils and assemblies that would make today's municipal governments blush with envy. Enter the temple, the real power broker in this ancient drama. These weren't just places of worship, they were the economic engines of Sumer. The temples controlled vast tracts of land and employed a workforce that would put Amazon to shame. They were the Walmart of the ancient world, where you could find everything from grain to textiles. The priests were not just spiritual guides, they were the CFOs of Sumerian society. In a world where the gods were as unpredictable as a game of Jenga, keeping them happy was serious business. This meant that the temple's influence extended far beyond the spiritual realm into the nitty-gritty of everyday life, including the legal system. Now, let's talk about the king, often portrayed as a demigod in flowing robes, but in reality more like an ancient bureaucrat who had to navigate the whims of both the divine and the earthly. The king's role in lawmaking was less about decreeing absolute edicts and more about rubber-stamping the divine will. Think less Julius Caesar and more middle manager with a hotline to the gods. Sure, he could issue decrees, but these were often guided by the temple's council and the city's assembly. The king was seen as the earthly representative of the gods, but he was also expected to protect his people and ensure justice, a task that involved a lot of clay tablets and probably a fair amount of divine intervention. In this maze of power dynamics, property rights emerged as a particularly thorny issue. Land wasn't just land, it was the key to wealth and influence. The Sumerians had a complex system for managing property, one that would fit snugly into any season of the crown. Property disputes were common, and the legal system had to be robust enough to handle them. Whether it was land, livestock, or a batch of barley, everything had a value. The Code of Ur-Nammu has several laws dealing with property, indicating that even 4,000 years ago, humans were wrangling over who owned what. This wasn't just a matter of personal wealth. It was about sustaining the city-state's economy and, by extension, its survival. But let's not pretend for a moment that these laws were the epitome of fairness. Like any system, it had its biases, usually favoring the elite. The wealthy landowners and temple officials often had the upper hand in legal matters, while the average Sumerian had to navigate a system that was as murky as the Tigris in flood season. Yet, within this framework, there was a concerted effort to create a semblance of order. The Sumerians understood that without some form of legal structure, society would descend into chaos faster than you can say cuneiform. So why does this matter to you, sitting there with your smartphone and your modern conveniences? Because these ancient legal norms laid the groundwork for an organized society, a society that dared to believe in something greater than mere survival. They dared to create a system that balanced power, managed resources, and sought justice, even if it wasn't always perfect. It's a reminder that the quest for fairness and order is as old as civilization itself, and while the tools have changed, the questions remain the same. As we wrap up this part of our journey through Sumerian legal history, remember that these ancient scribes and rulers were not just laying down laws, they were building the foundations of a society that dared to dream of order amid chaos. And as we continue to explore this fascinating world, keep in mind that each clay tablet, each ziggurat, and each law tells a story of humanity's earliest attempts to make sense of the world, one clay tablet at a time. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the enigmatic world of Sumerian law, where each decree, each decision was a step toward the civilization we know today. And speaking of stories, let's dive into the daily grind of a Sumerian judge, because, believe it or not, these guys were the original courtroom drama stars. Imagine a day in the life of a judge in ancient Sumer. No gavels or black robes here, just a clay tablet and a stylus. The Sumerian judge was more than just a legal authority. They were the embodiment of the city-state's commitment to justice, even if that justice was sometimes a bit wobbly, like a three-legged stool. Picture this. The sun is barely up, and our Sumerian judge is already at it, sipping on a cup of barley beer. Yes, morning drinking was a thing, as they prepare to tackle the day's docket. The cases they faced were as varied as the cuneiform symbols they inscribed. From boundary disputes to accusations of theft, every case was a reminder that human nature hasn't changed all that much in 4,000 years. After all, who hasn't had a neighbor try to move the fence a few inches onto their property? The judges of Sumer were tasked with deciphering the tangled mess of land ownership, a challenge that would make even the most seasoned real estate lawyer balk. Boundary disputes were common, thanks in part to the Sumerians' penchant for agriculture. With fertile land being as precious as a winning lottery ticket, it's no wonder people were constantly bickering over where one field ended and another began. In these disputes, the judge would call upon witnesses to testify, a process that often resembled a lively episode of Judge Judy. And here's the kicker. Witnesses were expected to swear an oath, invoking the gods to doom them should they lie. Now that's what you call divine incentive to tell the truth. The Sumerian legal system was unique in its reliance on oaths and witnesses, a practice that added a layer of drama to the proceedings. Imagine the tension in the courtroom as a witness, quivering under the weight of divine wrath, delivers their testimony. It's a scene with all the suspense of a modern courtroom thriller, minus the DNA evidence and high-priced lawyers. But let's not get too misty-eyed about Sumerian justice. Like any system, it had its flaws. Witnesses were often swayed by personal biases or familial allegiances, turning some trials into veritable soap operas of intrigue and betrayal. Take, for instance, a case from the city of Lagash, where a farmer was accused of pilfering a neighbor's sheep. The judge faced a lineup of testimonies more convoluted than a season finale of your favorite crime drama. One witness swore they saw the farmer sneaking through the fields at night, while another insisted they were with the accused at the local tavern. The judge had to sift through these conflicting accounts, relying on a combination of savvy intuition and a good dose of skepticism. In the end, the decision came down to who could swear the most convincing oath, a precarious balance between justice and divine intervention. And let's not forget the role of documentation. Every decision, every testimony was etched into clay tablets, creating a permanent record of the proceedings. These tablets were the legal briefs of the ancient world, offering us a window into the courtroom antics of the past. But this was no simple task. Imagine trying to capture the nuances of a heated legal debate with nothing but a stylus and a lump of clay. It's a wonder any records survived at all, yet survive they did, providing us with a treasure trove of information about Sumerian society. Theft cases, too, were a staple of the Sumerian legal diet. Unlike the boundary disputes, which were often mired in shades of grey, theft was a clear-cut crime with equally clear-cut penalties. The Code of Ur-Nammu spelled out specific fines for various thefts, from livestock to personal goods. If you nabbed a sheep, you were looking at a fine of 10 shekels, a hefty sum for a society where currency wasn't exactly flowing like the Euphrates. But here's where it gets interesting. The Sumerians had a keen sense of proportional justice. The punishment had to fit the crime, ensuring that the thief felt the sting of their misdeed without resorting to draconian measures. Of course, no legal system is complete without its share of loopholes and peculiarities. In one notable case, a man accused of stealing a neighbour's donkey managed to escape punishment by exploiting a technicality. The donkey had wandered onto his land, and he claimed it was a gift from the gods. The judge, perhaps amused by the audacity of the defence, ruled in his favour, a decision that likely left the plaintiff fuming. It's a reminder that even in ancient Sumer, the law was as much about interpretation as it was about strict adherence to the code. As we peel back the layers of the Sumerian legal system, it's clear that these judges were more than mere arbiters of law. They were the keepers of social order, tasked with maintaining the delicate balance between fairness and authority. Their decisions shaped the lives of their fellow citizens, creating ripples that spread throughout the city-state. And while their methods might seem archaic to us, the core principles of justice and equity remain strikingly familiar. So why does this matter? Because these ancient legal dramas are not just relics of a bygone era, they're a testament to humanity's eternal quest for justice and fairness. They remind us that the pursuit of order and equity is as old as civilization itself, a never-ending saga that continues to unfold in courtrooms around the world. And as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of Sumerian law, remember that each case, each decision, was a step toward the society we know today. So stay tuned, because the next chapter in our journey through ancient justice promises even more intrigue and revelation. In the grand theatre of Sumerian society, where clay tablets were the scripts and judges the directors, the economic backdrop was the ever-present stage. This wasn't just about legal codes, it was about ensuring the granaries were full and debtors weren't hanging from the nearest ziggurat. Let's face it, even back then, it was always about the money. So, what happens when a society decides to mix economy and law like a cocktail with a questionable expiration date? You get a system where trade, labour and debt are the main acts, each vying for the spotlight. The Sumerians were nothing if not pragmatic, and their laws reflected a keen awareness that without a stable economy, they were all just one bad harvest away from chaos. Take trade, for example. The Sumerians weren't exactly rolling in natural resources, so they had to get creative. Enter the caravan, a motley crew of merchants and donkeys traipsing across the desert. These weren't your average road trips, they were the lifeblood of the Sumerian economy. To protect this vital circulation, laws were put in place to regulate trade. Merchants, the rock stars of the ancient world, had contracts to ensure that nobody tried to pull a fast one. If a shipment of grain didn't make it from Ur to Lagash, someone was going to pay, literally. Contracts were inscribed on those trusty clay tablets, and if you think modern legalese is complex, try deciphering ancient Sumerian cuneiform after a few millennia of erosion. But let's not pretend these merchants were knights in shining armor. Just like today, there were scams, late deliveries, and the occasional lost shipment. The Sumerian legal system was there to step in, doling out fines and ensuring that trade remained the well-oiled machine it needed to be. Now, shift your gaze to labor, where the Sumerians had a system that was part feudal, part free market, and all parts fascinating. The temple, as you might recall, was the ancient equivalent of a multinational corporation. It owned land, employed workers, and had its hands in just about every economic pie. But unlike a modern corporation, the temple had a divine mandate to uphold, which meant it couldn't just treat workers like disposable cogs. Labor laws were established to protect workers, albeit with a heavy dose of favoritism toward those in power. Here's a fun fact. The Sumerians weren't big on the concept of weekends. In fact, work schedules were dictated by the seasons and the needs of the temple economy. You could be laboring in the fields one day and repairing a temple roof the next. The laws laid out specific duties and responsibilities, ensuring that workers knew their place in the grand economic scheme. And while the idea of labor rights might have been about as foreign as a tropical beach vacation, there was an understanding that a disgruntled workforce was bad for business and bad for keeping the gods happy. Ah, but what about debt? The spectre looming over ancient Sumer like a prophetic shadow. Debt was the double-edged sword of the Sumerian economy, a necessary evil that could either lift a family out of poverty or plunge them into slavery. And here's where things get particularly juicy. A good harvest could be the difference between a feast and famine, between freedom and bondage. If you couldn't pay your debts, you might find yourself working it off in the service of a creditor. This wasn't exactly the kind of gig economy you'd find in a tech startup, but it was the harsh reality for many Sumerians. The laws governing debt were as complex as a Sumerian love triangle. They laid out terms for lending, interest rates, and repayment plans. If you defaulted, you could be forced into a period of servitude, but not indefinitely. Laws ensured that debt slaves were eventually freed, because even in ancient times, there was an understanding that perpetual bondage wasn't exactly good for social stability. But let's not sugarcoat it. The system was heavily skewed in favor of the wealthy. If you had the means, you could lend grain at high interest rates and watch your wealth multiply faster than a flock of sheep in spring. The poor, meanwhile, were often left juggling debts like a circus performer with too many balls in the air. The Sumerians knew that an economy without some semblance of fairness was a ticking time bomb, so they crafted laws that attempted to balance the scales, albeit imperfectly. In the end, what emerges is a picture of a society deeply intertwined with its economic realities. The Sumerians managed to create a legal system that was both rigid and flexible, much like your favorite pair of jeans that somehow fit perfectly despite all odds. It was a tapestry of laws that, while not without its flaws, sought to address the fundamental issues of trade, labor, and debt. And isn't that what a legal system is supposed to do, even today? So, as we wrap up this exploration of the economic context behind Sumerian laws, remember that these ancient scribes and rulers were not just concerned with abstract notions of justice. They were grappling with the gritty realities of economic survival, weaving a legal framework that sought to balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the society. It's a balancing act that continues to this day, a testament to the enduring quest for order and equity in a world that never stops spinning. We'll leave the final word to those ancient Sumerian lawmakers, whose legacy continues to inform our understanding of law, economy, and the human condition. As we turn the page to our next chapter, consider the lessons we've gleaned from this ancient civilization and how they resonate with our modern lives. Stay tuned for more insights as we delve deeper into the enigmatic world of Sumerian law, where each legal decree was a step toward the civilization we recognize today. And so, dear listener, as we peel away the layers of clay and myth, let's reflect on the legacy of Sumerian law, a system that, like an ancient river, carved its path through the ages, leaving an indelible mark on history. We've journeyed through the dusty corridors of Ur-Nammu's code, navigated the bustling markets of Mesopotamia, and even peeked into the courtroom antics of Sumerian judges. But what does it all mean in the grand tapestry of history? First, let's take a detour into the realm of Hammurabi, the Babylonian king who swaggered into the scene around 1754 BCE with his own set of groundbreaking laws. Now, Hammurabi's code is the stuff of legend, often celebrated as the first great leap in human legal history. But here's the plot twist. It owes a hefty intellectual debt to our friends in Sumer. The Code of Hammurabi, with its infamous eye for an eye dictum, didn't just spring up from the Mesopotamian sands like a desert mirage. Instead, it was built upon the foundations laid by earlier codes like that of Ur-Nammu. This isn't to say Hammurabi was a Sumerian copycat. No, he was more of a legal remix artist, taking the greatest hits from previous laws and adding his own flair. His code was more comprehensive, covering everything from trade to theft, family law to professional standards. It was inscribed on a 7-foot stone stele, a testament to both its importance and Hammurabi's flair for the dramatic. If Ur-Nammu's clay tablets were the mixtapes of ancient legal discourse, Hammurabi's stele was the platinum album. But here's the kicker. While Hammurabi's laws were chiseled into stone, suggesting permanence, they also highlight an essential truth about legal systems. They evolve. They shift with the sands of time, adapting to new challenges and social norms. This dynamic nature is a direct legacy of the Sumerians who understood that law must be both a reflection of the society it governs and a guide towards its ideals. Now, let's tackle the romanticized view of ancient Mesopotamia. Picture a land of wise priests, just kings, and a populace living in divinely ordained harmony. Sounds idyllic, right? But like a sepia-toned Instagram filter, this image glosses over the gritty reality. Sumerian society, like any other, was rife with conflict, inequality, and the ceaseless struggle for power. The legal codes weren't just about justice. They were instruments of control and stability, a means to keep the chaos of human nature in check. We mustn't forget that these laws often favored the elite. The wealthy landowners and temple officials usually had the upper hand, while the common folk had to navigate a legal labyrinth that was as clear as the Tigris on a foggy day. Yet, within this imperfect system, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for concepts like fairness, proportionality, and the idea that laws should be publicly accessible, not locked away in the minds of the powerful. Fast forward to today, and we see how these ancient innovations have rippled through time. The notion that a legal code should be written down for all to see? That's a Sumerian legacy. The idea that laws should evolve to meet the needs of the people? Also a gift from the Fertile Crescent. We've swapped clay tablets for digital ones, but the quest to balance order with justice remains. Think about it. Whether it's a traffic ticket or a constitutional amendment, our legal systems are the descendants of those early scribes who dared to inscribe their rules on clay. They were the first to ask the big questions about governance and fairness, questions that still resonate today. How do we create a society that is fair, equitable, and just? How do we ensure that power is checked and balanced? These are the questions that legal systems have been grappling with since the days of ziggurats and barley beer. So, what's the takeaway from our ancient Sumerian legal adventure? It's a reminder that while the tools and contexts have changed, the core challenge remains the same, crafting a legal system that reflects our highest ideals while grappling with our basest instincts. The Sumerians, with their clay and stylus, started a conversation that continues to this day, a conversation about justice, order, and the human condition. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's raise a metaphorical cup of barley beer to the scribes, judges, and kings who first dared to dream of a society governed by law. Their legacy is not just in the codes they left behind, but in the very idea that we can and should strive for a just society. And while we may chuckle at the quirks and contradictions of ancient law, let's not forget that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, albeit giants with a penchant for clay tablets and a keen sense of justice. In the end, it's a tale of continuity and change, a story of how humanity's quest for justice is as timeless as the stars that once guided Sumerian merchants across the desert. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling over a legal form or pondering the intricacies of modern law, just remember, it all started with a pointy stick and a vision of order. And that, my friends, is the legacy of Sumerian law, a legacy that continues to shape our world, one legal code at a time. So, you've traded in your nomadic lifestyle for a plot of land and a dream of sedentary bliss. Welcome to the Neolithic era, where farming is all the rage and you're smack dab in the middle of humanity's first agrarian experiment. It's around 10,000 BCE, give or take a few centuries because, let's be honest, precision isn't exactly our strong suit at this point. But who needs calendars when you've got seasons to keep track of, right? You've just swapped the freedom of the open road for the stability of a fixed address. Sure, wandering around chasing mammoths had its charm, but let's face it, hunting can be a bit unpredictable. Nothing kills the vibe like coming home empty-handed after a long day of spear throwing. So here you are, trying to domesticate crops and, hopefully, not starve to death in the process. Romantic, isn't it? Speaking of romance, let's talk about this whole farming gig. You've probably heard the tales of bountiful harvests and quaint little fields. Unfortunately, the reality is more backache than bounty. You're not just planting seeds, you're wrestling with Mother Nature on a daily basis. Your new best friends? Wheat and barley. These were the first crops to make the leap from wild grass to dinner plate, courtesy of some natural genetic mutations and a lot of human perseverance or stubbornness, whichever way you want to look at it. But don't get too cozy with those golden grains yet. The road from wild to domesticated is paved with blistered hands and aching muscles. You're using tools that make modern gardening equipment look like space-age technology. Your plough? A simple stick. Your harvester? 2 hands and a lot of determination. It's like trying to sculpt the David with a butter knife. Now, let's debunk some myths. The idea of the noble farmer living in harmony with the earth is all well and good, but it's more sweat and tears than sunshine and rainbows. You're dealing with unpredictable weather, pests that would make a modern exterminator weep, and a workload that's less 9 to 5 and more dawn to dusk. Oh, and did I mention the joy of storing surplus food? Spoiler alert, it's a race against rot, rodents, and rivals looking to raid your pantry. And speaking of rivals, let's talk about the social dynamics of this brave new world. The move to farming didn't just change your day-to-day life, it shook up the whole social order. In your nomadic days, sharing was caring and everyone pulled their weight. But now, with land ownership and surplus food, things get a bit more complicated. Suddenly, someone's got to decide who gets what, and just like that, you have the seeds of social hierarchy. Congratulations. You've just planted the roots of inequality alongside your crops. But before you despair, remember this. You're not just a farmer, you're a pioneer in the grand experiment of civilization. Your struggles and innovations will lay the groundwork for future societies. Sure, it's a tough gig, but someone's got to do it, and it might as well be you. After all, without your daily grind, we'd still be chasing woolly mammoths across the tundra. So, as the sun sets on another exhausting day, you look out over your patch of hard-won land. It's not easy, but it's yours, a tangible piece of the earth. And isn't that worth 1,000 blisters? So, as the sun dips below the horizon and you wipe the sweat from your brow, let's dive into the social whirlwind you've unwittingly stepped into. Your plot of land isn't just dirt and sweat equity, it's a social game-changer, my friend. Suddenly, your worth isn't measured by how many mammoth steaks you bring home, but by the acre. Welcome to the dawn of private property, where land is the new status symbol. It's like the Neolithic version of owning a Tesla. Now, this whole land-owning business has its perks and pitfalls. On one hand, you've got a tangible asset, your very own piece of the earth to till and toil over. On the other, it marks the start of a societal shift. Remember those egalitarian bands where everyone shared the work and the spoils? Yeah, those are becoming as extinct as the saber-toothed cat. With land comes surplus, and with surplus comes the need to manage it. Enter the concept of hierarchy, stage left. In these burgeoning settlements, someone's got to take charge, right? Perhaps it's the guy with the most fertile fields, or the best irrigation system, or maybe it's just the loudest voice at the communal fire. Either way, you've got the makings of a leadership class. It's all very Game of Thrones, minus the dragons. The whole sharing is caring mantra is starting to fade, replaced by a more complex social dance where some have more than others. And let's talk about barter, the currency of your Neolithic economy. You're not dealing in coins yet. Those won't jingle in pockets for another few millennia. Instead, you've got the original swap meet going on. Your neighbour's got a shiny new obsidian blade, and you've got surplus barley. Deal. The barter system is economic poetry in motion, reliant on the value of goods and the art of negotiation. It's like trading Pokemon cards, only with more utility and fewer holographic Charizards. But let's not romanticize this too much. The barter economy is a fickle beast. It works fine until you realize you need to travel 5 miles, without a paved road in sight, to trade your grain for some much-needed livestock. And heaven forbid if a drought hits your precious crops, suddenly your bargaining power withers faster than an unwatered houseplant. It's a reminder that the Neolithic economy is as volatile as the stock market on a bad day. Of course, all this trading and landowning means communal living is where the action's at. Privacy? Ha! That's as mythical as the Loch Ness Monster. You're living cheek by jowl with your fellow villagers, which sounds cozy until you're trying to sleep while your neighbour's goat bleats all night. But hey, it's not all bad. Shared living means shared responsibilities and shared stories. Evening gatherings become the Netflix of the Neolithic, where tales of hunts and harvests are the binge-worthy content of choice. But let's not sugarcoat it. Communal life is a constant exercise in diplomacy. When land and resources are at stake, tensions can run higher than a kite in a hurricane. Disputes over irrigation rights or the best grazing spots can lead to more drama than a reality TV show. Yet, it's this very tension that's forging new social norms, laying the groundwork for laws and governance. You're not just growing crops, you're seeding the very concept of society. So here you are, a cog in the great prehistoric wheel, navigating the complexities of Neolithic life. As you drift off to sleep, perhaps you dream of a world where privacy exists and money grows on trees. But for now, this is your reality, a blend of barter and backbreaking work, community and competition. It's not perfect, but it's progress. And who knows, maybe one day your descendants will look back at your era with a mix of awe and relief that they've got it easier. Until then, rest up, because tomorrow's another day on the great agrarian frontier. So, you're drifting off in your cozy Neolithic bed, which is probably a pile of straw with questionable comfort, dreaming of a world where money grows on trees. But before we get too lost in fantasy, let's dive into some very real innovations that are about to make your life a tad bit more bearable, or at least more interesting. First up, the Neolithic toolkit. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of 10,000 BCE. Your ancestors might have been working with tools that today would seem as effective as using a spoon to dig a swimming pool, but let's give credit where it's due. Stone sickles were cutting edge, literally. Made with flint or obsidian, these babies were the original power tools for harvesting grain. They might not have had the ergonomic handles of modern gardening equipment, but they got the job done. And hey, they doubled as weapons, which is a bonus when your neighbor decides to get a little too friendly with your barley stash. And then there's pottery. Before you roll your eyes at the thought of clay pots, understand that before pottery, storing food was about as easy as keeping a toddler away from a candy jar. Pottery wasn't just about artistic expression, it was a game changer for food storage. Those clay vessels allowed you to hoard surplus grains and keep them safe from moisture, pests, and your ever-hungry neighbor. You could even cook in them, turning your culinary repertoire from raw to roasted. Who knew clay could be so versatile? But let's talk about the wheel, a technological leap so significant it's practically synonymous with innovation. Now, don't get too excited. The wheel didn't immediately revolutionize transportation. In fact, it was first used for pottery. That's right. Before it was the linchpin of chariots and carts, the wheel was spinning clay into practical pottery. So next time you see a potter's wheel, remember its humble beginnings. It wasn't until around 3500 BCE that wheels started rolling in Mesopotamia, making trade and travel somewhat less of a Herculean task. On the topic of beasts of burden, let's give a nod to our four-legged friends. Sheep and goats became the Neolithic farmers' best buds, not for companionship, but for their wool, milk, and meat. Domestication was your ancestors' nifty trick for ensuring a steady food supply. Instead of chasing down wild game, you could now let your livestock do the wandering. Sure, they required care and feeding, but let's be honest, they were far more reliable than the seasonal whims of wild hunting. And here's where we bust the myth of the primitive farmer. You might picture Neolithic folks as simpletons hacking away at the earth, but they were more like ancient engineers. Take irrigation, for example. Diverting water to crops wasn't just smart, it was survival. These early farmers built canals and ditches that would make modern civil engineers tip their hard hats in respect. It's like setting up a personal water park for your wheat field, minus the chlorine and screaming kids. Another genius hack, crop rotation. You might think this is a modern environmentalist trick, but Neolithic farmers figured out pretty quickly that planting the same crop year after year was a one-way ticket to barren soil. By rotating crops, they maintained soil fertility and kept yields up. It's not just sustainable farming, it's survival of the smartest. And let's not forget about the social innovation that came with technological progress. As tools improved and farming methods advanced, work became more specialized. This meant your village could support artisans and traders, not just farmers. Suddenly, you had people dedicated to crafting tools, weaving textiles, and perfecting pottery. It's the birth of the division of labor, folks, laying the groundwork for complex economies and, eventually, civilizations. But before we get too carried away with praise, remember this. All this innovation came at a cost. The wheel might have made life easier, but it also meant you had to deal with traffic, albeit on a much smaller scale. Livestock provided food and resources, but they also brought disease, a grim reality that would haunt human populations for millennia. And with specialization came inequality. Not everyone could be the village blacksmith after all. So, while the Neolithic farmer might not have had Wi-Fi or indoor plumbing, they were far from primitive. They were innovators, adapting to a changing world with grit and ingenuity. As you lay in your straw bed, dreaming of the future, remember that these early pioneers laid the groundwork for everything that came after. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, one stone tool at a time. And with that, sleep tight, because tomorrow you'll be back to the grind, literally and figuratively. After all, those grains won't harvest themselves, and there's always a new problem to solve on the agrarian frontier. So, as you drift off to dreamland, let's hit the ground running on the next episode of Neolithic Nightmares, the Environmental Edition. You see, back in the day, those Neolithic farmers were like the original influencers, except instead of Instagram feeds, they were changing the literal landscape. Farming might have seemed like a straightforward gig: plant seeds, grow food, repeat, but it turned out to be more of an extreme makeover for Mother Nature. And trust me, the Earth wasn't always a willing participant in this makeover show. First things first, let's talk deforestation. Imagine you're a Neolithic farmer eyeing a forest that stands between you and your future barley empire. Your solution? Chop, chop, baby! Trees were felled faster than you can say, sustainable forestry, clearing land for crops and, eventually, settlements. It's estimated that by the time the Neolithic Revolution was in full swing, vast swathes of Europe and the Near East were being systematically deforested. If you're keeping track, that's a lot of trees biting the dust long before the term carbon footprint entered the chat. And while clearing forests might have seemed like a good idea at the time, hello arable land! It wasn't all sunshine and fertile fields. No trees meant no roots to hold soil in place, leading to erosion faster than you can swipe left on a dating app. Without those leafy giants, wind and rain had free rein to wash away the topsoil, turning once fertile fields into barren landscapes. Ironically, these early farmers were sowing the seeds of their own soil depletion problems. Now, about soil depletion. It's like the hangover of agricultural progress. Continuous planting without giving the land a breather meant nutrients were being stripped faster than a Black Friday sale at the local potter's market. To combat this, some Neolithic communities turned to slash-and-burn agriculture, a practice that involved burning vegetation to return nutrients to the soil. It worked, but only in the short term. Over time, even these measures couldn't prevent the inevitable decline in soil fertility. But let's not paint our ancestors solely as agricultural villains. These early farmers were also the original tinkerers, experimenting with crop rotations and fallow periods to combat soil exhaustion. They may not have had a degree in environmental science, but necessity is the mother of invention, and they were figuring things out as they went along. It's a testament to human ingenuity or desperation, depending on how you look at it. Next up, the water woes. Our Neolithic friends didn't just face soil issues, they also had to manage water resources, and spoiler, it was as tricky then as it is today. With farming, the demand for water skyrocketed. Clever irrigation systems were born, channeling water from rivers to fields. These makeshift aqueducts and ditches were engineering marvels for their time, but they came with their own set of challenges. Poorly managed irrigation could lead to waterlogging or salinization, effectively turning fields into mud baths or salty wastelands. It's like the farmers were walking a tightrope with water on one side and drought on the other. And speaking of water, let's not forget the impact on local ecosystems. Agricultural expansion often meant diverting water sources, which could lead to dried-up streams and parched wetlands. This wasn't just bad news for the flora and fauna, it also affected the human communities dependent on these resources. Neolithic farmers might not have been eco-warriors, but they were certainly grappling with the complexities of environmental management. As for wildlife, let's just say that the Neolithic era was less the Lion King and more Gone with the Mammoths. With human populations settling down and expanding their territories, many large animals found themselves out of a home or dinner. Overhunting and habitat destruction led to the decline of several species that once roamed the earth. Sure, it was more about survival than sport, but the end result was the same. Biodiversity took a hit. So, what's the takeaway from this not-so-green revolution? As these early farmers grappled with the consequences of their actions, they were inadvertently writing the first chapters of an ecological textbook. Their struggles with resource management and environmental impact laid the groundwork for the lessons we're still learning today. The Neolithic era might not have coined the term sustainability, but their story is a cautionary tale about the delicate balance between progress and preservation. And there you have it. Neolithic farming, a saga of innovation, environmental impact, and human tenacity. As you mull over these ancient environmental challenges, remember that the solutions weren't always clear-cut, pun intended. Our ancestors were navigating uncharted territory, often learning the hard way that Mother Nature doesn't give free passes. But despite the blisters and backaches, they were laying the foundations for future generations to build upon. So, as you prepare to wake up and face another day in your Neolithic paradise, appreciate the legacy of trial and error that brought us to where we are today. And who knows? Maybe tomorrow's challenges will spark the next great leap in human ingenuity, or at least a good story to tell around the communal fire. Now, as you prepare to face another day in your Neolithic paradise, let's reflect on what these early farmers truly left us. Spoiler alert, it's more than just a legacy of sore backs and calloused hands. The Neolithic era wasn't just a pivotal chapter in the history book of humanity, it was the prologue to the entire modern world. And while it wasn't all sunshine and fertile fields, it fundamentally changed the course of human existence. First off, let's talk about how these ancient agrarians laid the groundwork for modern agriculture. The crops they cultivated, wheat, barley, millet, are the OGs of today's global food supply. They didn't just stumble upon these plants through trial and error. They selected and propagated the ones that would sustain their communities. Fast forward a few millennia, and you've got a world feeding itself on the descendants of those humble Neolithic crops. It's like an epic farm-to-table story, but over the span of 10,000 years. But agriculture was just the beginning. The social structures that grew from these early settlements were the real game changers. With the shift from nomadic to settled life, suddenly, people had to figure out how to live side by side without turning into a real-life episode of Survivor Neolithic Edition. The result? The birth of organized society. Land ownership, surplus management, and eventually governance systems. These were all seeds planted by those early farmers. It's like a prehistoric version of SimCity, with the added challenge of not having any digital tools to help you out. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't there something romantic about the idea of the noble farmer living in harmony with the land? Sure, the myth has its charm, but the reality was far more complex. It wasn't a pastoral utopia. It was more like a constant battle against the elements and, occasionally, your neighbors. Yet, this struggle produced something remarkable: resilience. These farmers were like the original survivalists, adapting to environmental challenges with a mix of innovation and sheer stubbornness. It's a lesson in grit that still resonates today. And here's a fun fact: their innovations didn't just stay on the farm. The tools and techniques they developed seeped into other aspects of life, influencing everything from trade to technology. Take the humble plough, for instance. What started as a simple stick evolved over time, eventually leading to the sophisticated machinery that powers modern agriculture. Or consider the wheel. What began as a potter's tool eventually revolutionized transportation, trade, and even warfare. It's like the Neolithic farmers handed us the keys to civilization, and we've been driving ever since. Speaking of trade, let's not forget how these early agrarians kick-started the global economy. Sure, their barter system was a little rough around the edges. No Bitcoin or stock exchanges here, but it laid the foundation for future economic systems. As villages grew into towns and towns into cities, the need for trade became paramount. This exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures was the start of globalization, long before anyone had coined the term. But let's debunk another myth while we're here: the notion that Neolithic life was all about peaceful coexistence and communal singing around the fire. The truth is, the rise of agriculture also sowed the seeds, pun totally intended, of conflict. As populations grew, so did competition for resources. Land disputes, food shortages, and territorial skirmishes were as much a part of this era as the idyllic image of a farmer tending his fields. In many ways, these early conflicts set the stage for the power struggles and wars that would shape human history. Yet, despite the hardships, there's something undeniably inspiring about these early farmers. They didn't have textbooks or blueprints to follow. They were writing the manual as they went along. Their story is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for adaptation and innovation. They transformed not just the land, but the very fabric of society, paving the way for everything from the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution. So, as you look out over your Neolithic plot of land, know this: you're standing on the shoulders of giants. These early farmers were pioneers, not just of agriculture, but of civilization itself. They faced a world of uncertainty and change, and through their struggles, they built the foundations of the modern world. Their legacy is etched into the DNA of every city, every farm, every technological advancement that followed. And there you have it, folks. The Neolithic era in all its gritty, groundbreaking glory. It's a tale of triumph and toil, of innovation and adaptation. As you drift off to dreamland, take a moment to appreciate the journey from those early days of farming to the world we know today. It's a journey of resilience and resourcefulness, a journey that reminds us of the power of human ingenuity. So, sleep well, knowing that tomorrow you'll tackle whatever comes your way with the same spirit that drove our Neolithic forebears to carve their place in history.